Happy holidays. Merry Christmas. All the things. I am not in the studio this week. I am visiting family in the middle of the United States in the middle of a snowstorm. It is about to hit 0 degrees outside, Fahrenheit, for those of you that the rest of the world that doesn't use silly Fahrenheit numbers. But yeah, this is a total mobile setup, so let me know if audio is not good. And of course, got to wear the Santa hat because if you're going to be on the internet and you're not silly, why are you on the internet? So let's have some fun. So this is, like I do every month, a Q&A, which is basically just means anything goes. Chat drives the conversation. I'm glad to answer questions, do demos, talk about things. I don't have a ton to begin with. So if you're new to this live stream, if this just showed up in your YouTube, welcome to the channel. My name is Bret. I'm here almost every Thursday. I would say 95% of Thursdays. I am here live at the same time for the last 3 or 4 years, and we're going to keep doing this in 2023. We're already booking guests all year long. We got a couple of months already filled out with people we're working on, and I'm excited because it's definitely going to be a year focused on CNCF tools, basically the outcomes of KubeCon, right? Like the CNCF tools, sponsored projects like that, open source stuff that's around the CNCF ecosystem, and new things that I'm doing in 2023 include a new live course, which I will send you a link in a minute if you're interested in getting on the early sign up and getting I don't know, it's like a 25%, it's a big discount on a live style course that I'm going to be starting here in the first quarter of 2023. And of course, we're going to be working on our other courses, updating those as well, because we always have to keep doing that. Those are in constant motion. There's other things that actually someone's already asked in chat about Patreon. Nadir, thank you for that question. Maybe, not really sure yet, but we're definitely going to be consolidating things. I think there's probably not a lot of future for me on Patreon. Now that we have YouTube memberships, we're going to be also doing this on my own site at bretfisher.com. And in Discord, we can now have memberships in our Discord chat server. By the way, if you didn't know about that, right there, devops.fan, go there and you can jump into our Discord chat, which I'm in there every day. We just hang out talking about all sorts of stuff. I don't teach everything that you possibly could need in DevOps, at least yet. So there's just recently we talked about some things that you could get for information from other courses, other resources. We've got a new Swarm channel because Swarm is back in 2022. We actually got a clear indication of the plans for the future from the Swarm team at Mirantis, and we're working on a plan to have at least one member from that team, if not more, from Mirantis on the show in the next couple of months. So that's going to be exciting to just kind of hear their vision for what they want to do with Swarm. I think really it's around storage, giving us better drivers, essentially, giving us access to the CSI drivers, the storage drivers for Kubernetes, and that's going to be exciting for next year. And so there's a couple of us in the community, and I know who you are. Some of those that we've talked a lot in chat about Swarm and how people are still using it. And so we just decided to make a channel in here for Swarm and talk about all the stuff going on there. And hope the intention is soon we'll have a Swarm Awesome. I'm setting that up in GitHub. So we'll have an awesome list for Swarm resources. And we'll try to keep that along with you, the community. I'm going to try to keep that relatively up to date. I'm going to need your help on that so that someone who's working on Swarm can get up-to-date details, not stuff that's like 4 years old and doesn't work anymore or whatever, right? So there's a lot happening there. I don't have any plans other than that Mirantis one for another Swarm episode next year, but who knows? Based on your feedback, we might have other people from the Docker captains, the Mirantis team, the Docker team on to talk about that. So anyway, jump over on Discord. That is devops.fan. That's the little thing you see up in the corner there, right above me. And go check that out and, whatever your topic is. Automated infrastructure, Terraform, cloud, Docker, Kubernetes, all those things are in there. And I'm really proud of that community. Thank you all for hanging out, helping others. That's really important to me. Every day, whether it's in my courses or it's on Twitter or it's somewhere, I feel like I'm always trying to help somebody further their cloud native journey. And I'm always impressed by the rest of the community and how much you all spend time helping each other as well. So that's the intention of that server. That was the goal of that server, was for us to all find each other in this community. And of course, there's a lot of Slacks out there. There's the official Kubernetes Slack, CNCNF Slack. Those are great resources as well. I just wanted to create a little hangout. So check that out if you haven't. Hello, everyone in chat. Carlos, Martin, Boris, the topic on its own. Yeah, so here for the Swarm fans. Yep. Yeah, I can't. Sadly, I don't get to show the custom images on screen. That's the emojis don't show up on screen. That sucks. But hello, everyone. Thanks for coming. So the only other real things I wanted to talk about. Again, this is topic driven. This is chat driven. So tell me what you want to know about. Tell me what you want to talk about. Throw your opinions in there. And the other things really is just that if you didn't hear it, I'm going to summarize some of the stuff this year and then last month. If you didn't hear, I opened up a merch store, and we're already trying to think about our next designs. So if you have a good idea for a t-shirt you would wear, you would buy, I have a few artist friends that are creating some of this stuff. So you can check this out on my spread shop, as it's called. It's basically just go to bretfisher.com. You can see the store link, or go to store.bretfisher.com. Links below. You can see all the merch. What would be something that you would want? And we also have to try to avoid copyright infringement, because I've had lots of t-shirt ideas so far that have been denied because they might look like some 70s rock band logo, or they might look like they're, some musical artist or some intellectual property of maybe a movie franchise, whatever it might be. It might be a DevOps logo that looks like a Marvel logo. There's lots of things out there, and the particular place we're on is pretty aggressive about not letting me have anything that's potentially copyright infringement, even if it's parody, which is technically okay. They don't allow it. So we kind of have to steer clear of that until we can figure out a better way to sell quality shirts. Not all of these places you can sell t-shirts on the internet are good. Anyway, check that out. And then if you didn't know, in the last month, we've had some of my favorite shows of the year. One is the Best of DevOps with two of my friends, Nirmal and Laura. So if you just go back in this channel, we now have that new URL at YouTube. It's youtube.com/@BretFisher. But you can see that stream. It was basically our opinions of the best topics on DevOps or related to DevOps. I think AI was one of the big ones there. Obviously, we're all talking about chat bots and AI chat and stuff like that with ChatGPT. We got Stable Diffusion and the image stuff, which we have some fun in that episode. Go check that out. But it was basically a huge list of topics, and we now have resources for that in the live stream. So if you go back to that live stream, you can actually scroll down and see all the links of all the things we talked about, including advancements in open telemetry last year, or this year rather, the year's not over. Survey trends about what's surveys in DevOps and trends in that. One of the things that, I don't want to hear the ads. I considered it the year of the desktop GUI for Docker and Kubernetes. Like, we had a lot of new stuff and a lot of advanced stuff. Docker created extensions. Podman desktop was released this year. Of course, Rancher desktop got better. We've had Lens, but now we have OpenLens, which is an open source version of that. We have the K9S, or K9s, I guess maybe you could say that. GUI inside the CLI, that's been around a while, but I feel like we've really sort of now have choice for everyone. Whether you need to run open source or a paid version, whether you want enterprise features or you don't care, like all these exist now. Performance is getting better. Docker continues to try to push performance on Macs in particular, because that seems to be the last place that we really need a lot of file system performance. So anyway, that was all in a show a couple weeks ago. And then the week before that, we did a Docker year in review of all the things Docker released. And I feel like we barely touched only on the last 6 months, but it wasn't really, we didn't have enough time in an hour and a half to cover all the things. So I also tried to, in that video, we have a link list of some of the topics and other videos that you might want to watch if you're really wanting to know everything that Docker did in 2022, which I feel like was a lot. They had a steady release cycle of desktop features, of some of the things that they needed to add to Hub. All that stuff happened in 2022. Of course, they've got a lot more work to do, and we're looking forward to that in 2023. All right, let's see what's going on in chat. Do you mind to write down the channels? I'm not sure what you mean, NY. As in like the link to my channel, which is what you're watching right now, which you can go to here. I'm not sure what you mean. Yes, you can absolutely ask questions on Kubernetes. That's why we're here. We're going to be chatting for the next hour or so on Kubernetes, Docker, containers, anything cloud native. Thank you. Please explain Kubernetes. Kubernetes is essentially a system that allows many servers to run Docker or a container runtime. So Docker, think of Docker as I run containers on one server, one machine, and Docker manages that. Let's ignore Swarm for a minute. That's Docker. Kubernetes simply allows you to do that across many, many machines, and a single command line or a single web interface can control all those. So you can run thousands and tens of thousands of containers, all with a single point of control for that system. And then you can add all these extras and add-ons on top of it that give you extra functionality, like backups or traffic monitoring or logging or all these different enhancements you might want to do. We have these things called service mesh. We have RBAC. We have all these advancements now. So you can basically do anything you want on top of Kubernetes. And Kubernetes acts as the decision engine for how your apps run, where they run, and what settings they might have when they run. And it does all that through a standard interface, either on the command line or through the API. So it allows you to manage a fleet of servers all running containers through a central interface. All right, Boris, CKA versus KCNA. I like both. I think that CKA is really only necessary if you plan on being a full-time Kubernetes admin. If you're trying to get a job deploying and managing multiple Kubernetes clusters, then CKA is eventually what you should do. But those other certifications, they support that, right? Like you maybe if you're going to be a kube admin, CKA is the most important one for you. But we now have the developer focused one, we have the security focused one, we have the cloud native focused ones, and they're just, to me, they're ancillary. They're additional on the side, but if you're going to manage a Kubernetes, CKA, that's the way to go. If you're not going to manage Kubernetes and you just want to prove that you know the basics, that's kind of what the other ones are. The cloud native one, that's sort of making sure that you know the cloud native ecosystem, which I think is actually going to be more important in the future as it becomes more popular. I think still cloud native relatively is a new, like CNCF is a relatively new name. If I went to 10 random people in tech and asked them if they knew what CNCF was, I would say probably only 2 out of those 10 would know what it is. So as that becomes more popular and people become more aware of it, as they start to use more open source in their IT, because I still work with companies that are still just adopting things like Git, or adopting more cloud instead of their data center. So there's definitely still lots of companies, even though it feels like everybody's running Kubernetes and everybody's running in the cloud, they aren't. It just is, we all have different worldviews. We all have different experiences with different people, and there's still tons of communities, especially the Microsoft community, the Microsoft server community, where this has not really become the default. A lot of us, this is the default. We do this every day. We've been doing Docker forever, Kubernetes for 5 years. Like that's normal for a lot of people, but there's still a lot that aren't. So I think that the KCNA, stuff like that, is maybe not as popular, maybe not as obvious. So, do I think that Istio has won the service mesh wars? No. Well, first off, there will always be multiple service meshes because to me, the service meshes are starting to become kind of like your distribution of Kubernetes. distribution of Kubernetes that you choose is what you choose, right? We still have 100 distributions of Kubernetes. I don't think that's going away anytime soon. I think that if you're if you're an Oracle customer, or if you're a VMware customer, or if you're on AWS, you're going to be making choices based on your vendors that you've chosen. If you're on Amazon versus Azure, you're going to make different distribution choices. A lot of the distributions are having service meshes as an option, where it's sort of a one-click install. It's a very easy install. Rancher and a lot of these other ones, they will have a couple of choices. But for example, if you're a traffic customer, which I know a lot of people love traffic as an ingress and as a proxy, and if you choose that, their service mesh, especially if you use their paid version, their service mesh is a really easy layer on top of that. It makes sense to go with their service mesh if you're already using their other products. Istio and others are going to be preferred based on your expertise of your team, whether the distribution of Kubernetes you has prefers that service mesh. It's the same that goes for networking protocols. If you choose a certain Kubernetes distribution, it will prefer a certain CNI. And so that's why we're going to have multiple CNIs out there. Calico, Selenium, not Selenium, what was the other one? All the different CNIs, the one, Weave, whatever, I can't remember all of them. But I'm thinking of Calico because we're getting ready to have Calico on the show next month, because there's multiple choices with networking and there's going to be multiple choices with service mesh. I think it really comes down to, what do your vendors choose? What is your expertise in? What are the tools that you already use? What do they prefer? What's easier for them out of the box? And I think that we're consolidating the feature set and the functionality, right? So just like CNIs and CSIs, service meshes, I think will all start to have the same fundamental features, and it'll be very much up to, you need this one specific feature that you know you need, and only maybe these two service meshes have it, or whatever. So anyway, it's a great question. If you don't have an opinion, by the way, if you don't have a service, if you think you need a service mesh, by the way, don't install it if you don't think you need it. It's added complexity, it's added work. If you're not going to use it, if you don't know even what it is, then you probably don't need it. Service mesh solves problems, and not everybody has those problems. So I don't think that I would necessarily install it everywhere. So, the Discord and Slack channels. So that's the Discord. That's my Discord. If you're talking about Kubernetes or CNCF, just look up Kubernetes Slack. Just Google it. It'll be probably like the first or second link. It's like, Kubernetes.cncf or Kubernetes.slack.com or something like that. If you want to go to theirs. But I'm just talking about mine. Mine is the Discord that's over there. Thanks, NY. Good question. This is a question we get a lot. Grotham, sorry if I mispronounced that. Is it a good idea to run databases on Kubernetes? I know it can, but is it recommended to run critical production workloads? There is nothing in my mind, as long as you are a database person that knows databases, it knows your own database, and you know Kubernetes well. There's nothing wrong with running databases on Kubernetes. I've been seeing people do it in production for well over 5 or 7 years, since the very early days of Docker and Kubernetes. There's inherently no reason to avoid containerizing database servers. The problem comes into play when people don't really know Kubernetes well, and maybe they're not really database admins, because Kubernetes doesn't make it easier for like 80% of the reasons to be a database admin. The one thing that Kubernetes can make it easier is if you use an operator for your database of choice to help upgrade the versions and maybe create a 2 or 3 node cluster, depending on, whether if you're on MongoDB, it might be a 3 node server. If you're on Postgres, it might be a mirror or a replica, and that might be the model you use. Of course, there's all sorts of other things out there. We have Cockroach, we have a dozen or more popular database platforms, and they all have specific designs for how you set up redundancy, replication, failover, backups. Those are all things that if you don't know, Kubernetes may make it a little bit easier to do those things. because operators and custom command line systems will help you maybe set up a replication for between two database servers. But it's not going to make you be able to ignore being a database admin. This is why I recommend always using cloud databases. If you're in the cloud, use their databases. Yes, it's more expensive, but so are you. You're expensive. Hiring a DBA is expensive. And they are going to do things like make sure that it fails over properly, make sure that it's monitored and it's uptime and it has backups and that the restores are going to work. Like all those things are complicated. Kubernetes helps you manage that, but it doesn't take away the work. So unless you have a bunch of spare time, I recommend always do cloud databases. I don't work with any team that runs their own databases in production. It's never happened. That's not true. One customer of mine I know runs their own databases, but they run it in their own data center. They're not in the cloud. That's why they have to run it. And they have a dedicated database admin team that manages those SQL servers. And they don't do it in containers because they're running on Windows, and Windows SQL servers don't really run in containers anymore. That's not a thing. Microsoft got rid of the Windows version of Microsoft SQL Server. Anyway, so you get my point, right? Like do the cloud first. Kubernetes doesn't absolve you of having to monitor it, manage it, back it up, test restores, test failover. For example, just Redis alone, like the complexity of Redis redundancy and failover, it's a thing. Like you have to set up an extra little thing, an extra pod, essentially a service that will fail over your servers. And then that becomes a central point of failure and a central point of connections. So it becomes complicated if you're not a true Redis engineer to understand failover, redundancy, replication, backups, all that stuff. So I recommend using the cloud. But if you were to say, hey, look, we have a database admin, we have a backup admin, I have time to manage databases in Kubernetes. I know I've researched and tested the operator or the solution I want to use for my databases in Kubernetes. Then go for it. Like you've got all the people, you've got all the skills, you know Kubernetes, you know what you're doing. My first time running production databases, I accidentally dropped and deleted a volume on the database. Of course, this was 2015, but this happened in Kubernetes and in Docker because I didn't know how to run properly volumes in production at scale. I thought I knew things, but it was really early days. Kubernetes was very young. Docker was very young. And I got arrogant and I accidentally dropped the database. Luckily, we had a backup, and it was technically, I think it was like pre-release. It was like staging or partial user testing. We weren't doing it for everything yet. And I got in trouble and I had to learn from that. So you don't want to be doing all your learning of how to run volumes for the first time or how to do backups and restores for the first time in production databases. That's a mess. But no, I wouldn't be scared of it. If I knew what I was doing, I wouldn't. If you know enough to run the database on a physical server and you've learned Kubernetes really well, then there's no reason to avoid moving it into Kubernetes. And those of you in chat, let me know, like, do you agree with this opinion? I don't know. All right, I'm just catching up with some of the chat. I meant to have music today. Hopefully that's not too loud. Let me know if that music's too loud. All right, Nadir, we use AWS EKS. EKS for our Kubernetes deployments. All right, so Nadir's actually having a pretty interesting question here on logging. You're using CloudWatch for logging. There's so much noise and money. Any thoughts on good practices there? So yes, I think, so here's the thing about logging. Like we're evolving. We're evolving to a situation where two things you need to do. You need to look at two things. One is you're going to use something like FluentBit, which is one of my favorite logging aggregators. So FluentBit is more like a logging driver, I guess. So install use FluentBit or something like it, and you're going to filter out unnecessary log messages before they leave the server. This is a configuration that all of them do, right? Logstash, like you name it, all the different drivers. They allow you to filter so that you're not sending messages to CloudWatch that are unnecessary. Okay, so if you never need them, if they're not important, first try to see if your applications can just not report that, right? If it's custom code you're writing, then just have different error levels, and then you basically, if you're having a problem in production, you can figure out a way to basically dynamically change the level of logging so that you can then, get more messages to your CloudWatch. Because there is such a thing as too much logging, right? So you got to figure out how do you filter. I personally do that. So especially when I'm working with old legacy apps that log way too much and they don't really have levels, so I can't control their logging level. Then what I have to do is I have to use something like FluentBit to filter out messages based on regex or based on text matching and just prevent those from ever going to CloudWatch, okay? And then if I have problems, maybe I can go and set an environment variable, it'll restart all of my pods, and then in that I'll get more advanced logging when I need it. That's one thing. Two is that there is a change happening in the industry around logging. So what I advise for you is look at OpenTelemetry. We talked a little bit about that in a couple of weeks ago on the episode about the best of DevOps for the year. We talked about OpenTelemetry, and there is a newer methodology that we're taking to the way we approach logging. And essentially what we're talking about here is that modern teams are reducing the amount of logging and improving their metrics. So if you're writing applications, if you work with dev teams that make applications, instead of them just dumping everything they do into logs, they need to start architecting their applications so that they have metric endpoints that you can go and collect statistics. For example, if you need to know, maybe you're reporting on every new connection in some sort of proxy or something like that. Well, instead of doing a log for every new connection, you would have a metric endpoint in that application that something like Prometheus or others can check out that metrics endpoint to see maybe the current active connections or the current connection count, right? And because that's usually what you want. You don't want to have a log that spits out a new message every time someone connects, and then you have then another system that aggregates those and averages them over a minute so that you can see the average number of log messages in a minute. Like, you don't want to be doing that. That is sort of a broken model, and that's what leads to really big log files, log storage. So you want to move away from logs on everything you can, and you start asking yourself, if I have errors and I have proper error monitoring in my app so that I'm actually reporting different error codes, would it be better to have an error code for a log entry for every error code I get? Or should I have a metrics endpoint that is tracking the number of errors in a second or the errors per minute? And that's in your app so that Prometheus can then monitor that, that basically a very small value, a numerical value, and it can monitor that over time and track that rather than having a log aggregator, then collect them all, count how many per minute, and then report something essentially, which is a metric, to the humans, right, through some sort of graph. So that's part of what's happening in the OpenTelemetry scene is we're moving away from logging being the default and easy button for just put everything in the logs and we'll figure it out later. That is a less mature approach. The more modern approach is to customize your applications to give more intelligent metrics. Anyway, I've said it already enough. I'm going to move on from that one. Hopefully that helps. I don't know. I don't have a particular strategy on reducing CloudWatch. There are companies out there that help you save on those bills. They sort of do things like push your log storage off to cheaper storage or something. I personally, what I do with teams is we cut out the unnecessary logs through something like FluentBit or any of the other Logstash or any of the logging tools, or we just basically tell our apps to stop logging and we use metrics. So that's the two ways to do it. Hopefully that helps. That's a great question. All right, let me see if I can catch up on some of this chat. All right, Endron, hopefully I pronounced that correctly. You're just getting started with Docker. Outside of working, I'd like to use Docker to run some services locally, like a personal Git-a. I don't know what Git-a is. Am I even saying that right? Sorry, I don't know what that is. Is that like a Git server? How powerful does hardware need to be? Would an old Raspberry Pi 3 work? Yes. So Docker doesn't really add much in the way of resource utilization to a machine. But a Raspberry Pi 3 is pretty small. It's going to be ARM-based. I do believe Raspberry Pi 3s can do an ARM 64 V8, essentially, a 64-bit version of ARM. I do believe that the Raspberry Pis, I know the Raspberry Pi 4s are, and I have a 4. So 3 is going to be even slower. Your biggest problem is going to be memory, because unless you have a lot of memory in that 3, Docker is going to use 100 meg, maybe a couple hundred meg at most of memory in addition, because you've got Docker running, containerd, and runc, typically all running in the background. So let's say 50 to 100 meg to start with. But because that processor is going to be so old and slow, your application, really the question you should ask yourself is, can my application even run on a Raspberry Pi 3? If it can, you can usually fit it in there with Docker. So try it. What's the worst that's going to happen? It's going to be slow. Like maybe it won't run, maybe it won't even start because Linux will get an out of memory error. It just depends. I have a Raspberry Pi 4 with 8 gig of memory, and that's able to run web servers and Docker just fine. I can run Kubernetes on it just fine. But obviously, since I've only got 8 gig of memory, I'm not going to be running a database plus a website plus an API plus Kubernetes. Like I'm not going to be doing all that at the same time on one machine. So I would say just try it, because I don't think of in that case as just Docker alone as really using a lot of resources when you only have a couple of containers. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. You're welcome. Yeah. Ro, I appreciate it. Brandon's got a really good explanation on the service mesh. And to be honest, I haven't kept up with the latest on like Linkerd and Cilium. So, we had Cilium on the show last year, but I haven't had Linkerd on the show. I haven't kept up with like what that project is doing and what the latest features are. But I wouldn't really call it a war. It's just choice, right? War implies that they're competing with each other. But at the end of the day, these are all open source projects, and there might be some vendor agendas a little bit in there, but mostly, if nobody was using it, it would go away, right? I'm excited about them getting simpler and getting easier to use and easier to understand. And the challenge is that they're adding so many features to these products that it can be a little daunting. And that's why when people come to me and say, should I use service mesh? I often will say no, because if you don't know why you need service mesh, and if you don't have a problem that specifically it solves, like maybe you need mutual TLS, right? Maybe you need mutual authentication. Well, service mesh can help with that. But if you don't know that you have that problem and you need to solve that problem, then why would you put in service mesh to begin with, right? I'm not sure if that's a question role on Docker and Kubernetes when you get hands-on or lab projects you can work on. Well, if you're taking my courses, links below for my courses, yes, you have sort of quizzes in there. You have things that you're doing actively with me. You have assignments. Yeah, check out the Docker Mastery course. There's a lot in there. The Lee potato. I don't know about the Lee potato either. I'm so out of date. Yeah, let's check out the Lee potato. Assuming you already know Docker, what's another prerequisite before learning Kubernetes? Nothing. If you understand containers, you understand registries, you understand images, you know how to do Docker files and compose files, you know how to bring things together with multiple services and containers, you're ready to go to Kubernetes. And that's what I do in my Docker Mastery course. You actually learn Docker, and it assumes that you don't even know Docker. Then you learn Swarm, and then you learn Kubernetes. You could skip the Swarm part. If you already know Docker, you could either take my Docker Mastery course and just start where the Kubernetes part starts, or jump straight to Kubernetes Mastery, which is meant for people that already know Docker, and it starts right out assuming you know containers. And it just starts building your Kubernetes knowledge. So you can try either one of those. And you get a 30-day money-back guarantee. So if you don't like the courses, if you don't think it's right for you, try the other one, return the one you don't use. You know, if you get through it in 30 days, technically you can get your money back and you got free education. Rajaslan. I'm so sorry. I need to do better on that name. Rajaslan. Sorry if I mispronounced that. Probably really messing that up. Anyway, that's a really cool insight there. Thank you, Cilium, and the ambient mesh feature. Ooh, I'll have to check that out. Ambient mesh. That just sounds cool, doesn't it? Ambient mesh. Well, hello, Barack. Welcome. All right. What seems so complicated about running your own databases? Well, if you're just one person and you're just running your own little website, just run a single web server. I mean, a single web server and a single database. Like, that's fine. But you know, I work with companies that have 3 dedicated database admins, right? They have to monitor storage space to make sure that the databases don't fill up disks. They have to auto expand those. They have to move to faster storage, migrate storage when new storage, like, you know, GP3 comes out or whatever, and they need to migrate their databases. They need to back up and test recovery of those databases. They need to monitor them. They need to test failover from the application point of view to make sure that the database indeed does fail over when a database server goes down and your whole app doesn't crash. So there's a lot going on there, at least with every team I've ever worked with in production. So it's not as easy as just set it and forget it. It's more like that, though, if you use the cloud versions. If you use the cloud versions, they do a lot of that work for you. So they are the database experts, and I really like doing that versus having to run my own. But I've been running databases for 30 years. So it's gotten a little easier. They got a little more stable, but in general, it's still complicated to set up a replication and to keep it working across versions, and don't affect the performance when I'm doing replication, right? Give me read-only replicas for my reporting system so that they don't kill the performance of my main read-write database clone. Like, there's just so much to it that if you're running a Drupal website, it's pretty easy. But if you're running modern advanced systems, you usually have Redis, Postgres, MySQL. You're going to have probably MongoDB or Cockroach or something else. You're going to end up running 4 or 5 different types of databases and trying to maintain all of those and having all of those redundant, all those backed up, all those being highly performant, fast responses. You're going to have to, you might have to manage the indexing on it so that you get fast responses, because I've had to work with database teams many times because they write applications and they get slow response from the database. They don't know why it's so slow, and it's usually because of indexes or because of storage or something else like that. Or there's not enough memory being given to cache things in memory. There's just all that kind of stuff that a database admin typically does. And if you don't have one, you got to do all that yourself. It gets a little bit easier when you're using cloud databases and then you're using some packaged application that already does its correct indexing and correct storage procedures and all that stuff. Like, if you're buying something off the shelf, it just works. But I tend to work with custom application teams that are building their own apps, and they're not DBAs. so they don't know all the different tricks that databases need to have enabled and to make them fast and responsive. So that's what I work with. That's a good question. Thanks, Jonathan. Please explain DSR. I don't know what DSR is. Don't know what database. Don't know what that is. Tell me what it is. Don't keep it a secret. Hello there, Yusuf. Welcome back. Good to see you. I keep hearing people say that Kubernetes master and worker nodes cannot span multiple regions. Is this so? If all of my DCs are connected via LAN, can it be achieved? No, you shouldn't do it. So this, whether it's Kubernetes, Swarm, Nomad, I mean, like whatever you're doing, you shouldn't be multi-region in a single cluster. The design, and this goes back to what is underneath Kubernetes, right? Underneath the nodes in Kubernetes is a database, etcd usually, and etcd is not designed for high latency environments. It needs fast replication, under 10 milliseconds. And so it's usually not possible to do under 10 millisecond latencies on TCP connections between regions. So the way you solve that is you put a cluster, or usually it's going to be a bunch of clusters, in each region, and then you use something in front of that, CloudFront, Cloudflare, whatever you need, in order to help direct traffic to whichever one is closest or whatever. It depends on your application architecture at that point, but Kubernetes isn't designed, nor really anything else that I work with in this kind of stuff. It's not designed for cross-region because of the network latency. If you have more questions on that, that's a great question. Yeah, it's a great question. There's a protocol called Raft that etcd underneath Kubernetes, the database of Kubernetes, it uses, and that Raft is really what is limiting all of this. And the other thing really is that there's a lot of stuff going on in Kubernetes, and sure, you can really customize this, but Kubernetes, it's not always easy to tell it like these nodes over here in this region and these nodes over here in this region, and I want you to make sure that you put my application in both, but I always want the traffic to be local so that if the node over here on the web app is going to talk to the API, that it doesn't go to that region for the API, that it always talks local. Like there's ways to make all that work, but it gets really complicated really fast. And it's easy to end up where traffic is going to the wrong place, or it's going over the slow link instead of the fast link. So it's generally easier, I find, to move that problem down the stack and then up the stack, meaning you make multiple clusters per region. You got your staging cluster, your testing cluster, whatever, you got your production clusters. And then if you need multi-region support, you're basically going to end up with clusters in all the places. And then you're going to look at tools that support multi-cluster routing. A lot of the ingress utilities, if you look at Contour, for example, is an ingress and proxy system. It has a new project that we talked about this year, actually, on the show. If you just go back looking in the episodes for Contour, might have been last year, but they have this idea of other clusters in front of those clusters that then route the traffic to different clusters based on where it's at. So, thank you. I appreciate that you're here. By the way, thanks so much to those of you who became members today on the channel. The YouTube membership, hopefully it's easy to use and easy to get in there and get out. And it gives you access to a couple of things. It gives you access to special Discord channels where patrons hang out and talk about stuff. But we also do, the patrons, the members, whatever you want to call it, in that supporter channel, we do a monthly hangout, of audio-visual hangout. It's like a Zoom call. And we all just do that in Discord every month. And we bring projects, we bring ideas. Some of those people are in this right now. So if you have questions about that, feel free to ask. But that's basically, you're buying me a coffee every month to get access to that community and to just hang out every month. So we have a lot of fun doing that. We just had one a couple weeks ago, or maybe it was last week, I think, We did one last week, and it was a great hangout. We spent 2 hours in there. People came and went, and it was a good time. So you get that by becoming a member, and then it gives you access to Discord. So. My Kubernetes pods are evicting with ephemeral storage issues. Uh-oh. Well, this is maybe not the right place to be to troubleshoot that. But yeah, storage issues and evicting can be some of the most confusing things to figure out, right? Like that's where it requires you to really know Kubernetes and to start looking at the events and understand the different conditions for why things might be evicted. Storage is one of them. There's certain things, and did I do a show about this? I might have done a show about this. You want to set up resource limits and resource requests. You want to do that stuff to make sure that you are guaranteed service. So Kubernetes has this concept, and maybe I'll give you a link. I don't know if this will help. Maybe you already know all this stuff about Kubernetes, but in the Kubernetes, I have a pod spec repo. In my pod spec repo, let me see if I pull this up. So Kubernetes has quality of service concepts, right? And so if we just switch over here real quick, I have if you're someone who's writing Kubernetes YAML, I created a repo example this year that is basically what I would consider my recommended default pod specification for whether it's no matter what it is, all the things that you should have in your pod specification, whether it's a deployment style or it's a static stateful set, whatever it is, a job, they're all going to have pod spec in them. So I created a repo, and it has basically a single YAML file. It's a whole repo just for one file. And in that file, there is this sort of template that I use. I use it for my customers. And when you start looking at the resource stuff, I mentioned in here that you probably in some cases want your quality of service to be guaranteed. And there are requirements in Kubernetes in order to do that. So I will give you also this page, which is the Kubernetes quality of service page that shows you how, depending on what you do in those resource reservations and limits, you can possibly be evicted when more important workloads show up. Now, storage issues are usually because the storage, evictions of storage to me, I'm trying to think of what the most popular cause would be. Maybe someone else in chat will know. I'm thinking usually for me, the storage problems are that it can't create the volume. So I can't get the persistent volume, and then my pods never actually get scheduled because it's waiting for the volumes to be created, right? That's usually like it's a bad driver, I have some sort of API key wrong, something's not working. That's usually what I have. I don't know about evictions due to ephemeral storage. I'm trying to think, I don't know if I've ever had that issue. So good luck in your troubleshooting. I don't know if you have any other specific questions or if anyone here has tips on how to deal with that. But I think that one thing we may not realize a lot of times is things get evicted maybe because of resource requests and requirements. For storage, you're not really doing quality of service for storage usually in Kubernetes. So that's not really a thing. So it may not help you, anything I told you. But when I think about evictions, that's what I think about is resource requests versus limits and stuff like that. But good luck to you. Maybe I recommend, if you don't have a place, if you've tried getting help elsewhere, just put your give a very descriptive piece of information around your problem into the Discord server, that over there. And maybe there's someone there that's had that experience before and can help you. There is also on the Kubernetes Slack, I do believe there's many storage related channels that you can go in and maybe ask in there in Slack and see if people can help you. Yeah, my Unscientific Opinions. Raj, you got some great questions today. I appreciate it. I see Argo CD a lot. I feel like Argo is winning the marketing war. If there's a war, I hate to use that word. We're always going to end up with multiple options. I hope we continue to have multiple options. I think that Weave is still fully invested in Flux, and then Acuity, the company behind Argo, Intuit invented Argo. Acuity is a company formed by the founders to take Argo, and they've released a new cloud-hosted version of it that basically simplifies the Argo solution. So I think, and Weave does the same thing, I think, with Flux. I'm not really sure. I know they have a Weave cloud. I'm not sure if that's for Flux or what, but because I haven't used it yet. If it was me today, I would use Argo. That's my thing. I deploy the web GUI. The developers like using that for status. They don't necessarily do things in it. I don't give them write access necessarily, but I'll give them read access. They can see the status of their deployments. They can see potentially any problems with the rollouts or the rolling updates. So I started with Flux, moved to Argo, and then never went back to Flux. That's me. So I have one company I work with that still uses Flux. It works fine for them. They're not interested in moving to Argo because they know Flux, and Flux works great, and they use it. I don't believe, outside of Weave Cloud, I don't believe there's any up-to-date, current, well-used Flux GUIs. I could be wrong. My understanding, actually, I think I am wrong. There was an open source one, and then I think Weave took it over or something. Someone probably knows in chat. Someone in chat's going to correct me, I hope. And I haven't used KPT. So that, I believe, is part of his, I don't, what is KPT part of? Is that part of VMware? I'm not sure about KPT. I see you, Brendan. Most unscientific person I know. Yeah, I mean, that's someone check real quick on the CNCF surveys. Do they ask about your GitOps tool and what the market share looks like? Maybe that's out there. Let's see. Survey 2021. Raw data on GitHub. Let's look at GitOps. See if nope, the word GitOps isn't even in their survey. So, yeah, it's only 12 pages. I don't see anything in there. But I would say that at least when it comes to Flux and Argo, use either one. Like I would say it's default to Argo, and if you have a reason to go to Flux, then go to Flux. But if you like Argo, stick with it. I see Argo showing up all over the web on other websites like CI solutions, automation solutions. Will put up the Argo logo as sort of like, this is what we work with these tools, and they'll throw things up like Docker, Kubernetes, and Argo. I am going to start teaching Argo next quarter in my live show, a live course. So if you go to, let's see, this is I'm going to send you this link. This is a course that we hope to start next month, and it's going to be cohort based. So you're going to be learning GitHub Actions for building and testing your containers. And then you're going to be using Argo for automatically deploying them using a GitOps style approach, which is my favorite way to deploy to Kubernetes. And you're going to use Argo for that. And we're going to do it live. So it's going to be me and you in Zoom with a small group of people. And we're going to be learning it together. We're going to be using it together. And ideally, you're going to be deploying it in your apps. And you're going to be doing it in a real production type setting for your solutions, whatever your tools are at work. You're going to be trying to implement this, and the group is going to be there in both chat and Q&A as well as live every week. And it'll be something like 1.5 hours a day, every other day for 2 weeks, maybe a little longer. So that's the style, and this is a whole new thing I'm trying out. So check this out. And get on the waiting list. If you get on the waiting list, you get a discount, and then you'll see when we announce it and when we start setting the dates for this. We really haven't announced it yet, but there's we're working with we got a team of people working on this, and I'm excited to get started with the first cohort. Is going to be essentially a beta, so like maybe 10 or so people the first time, and we're going to be working on it together and making sure that this is the perfect fit and that I get everything in the course you need and that there's enough content. But it's going to be interactive. We're going to be doing this together. You're going to be breaking out into small teams, working with other people in this community to help implement this on your own stuff. So you'll be able to ask other people questions. We'll have different people sort of telling their theory and how they're approaching this and how they're going to use it in their own projects. And it's going to be great. So I'm excited about it because it's totally new, totally different than my Udemy courses, which is you watching videos and not actually talking to me. So this is a way, essentially this is like free, cheap consulting. It's kind of what this is going to be. And we'll be doing it starting next quarter. Hopefully next month. I don't, we haven't had the dates locked in yet, but hopefully next month. Thanks for the questions, and thanks and Happy New Year. Yeah. Happy holidays, everybody. I'm glad everybody showed up today. I know we've all got Christmas in a couple of days. Everybody's busy. I appreciate you for being here. Oops. How did I do that? Oh, look at that. Accidentally, let me undo that. There we go. I need to lock that so it doesn't accidentally change. All right. Many Kubernetes and cloud native projects are built with Golang. Is it necessary to learn this language as a DevOps engineer? No. No. You don't have to learn Golang to use tools in Golang. Do you have to learn C in order to run Linux binaries? No. Golang, like any other language, will help you at first as a DevOps engineer. The first thing I would do is, instead of learning languages, if you're not a programmer, then just learn how to build some languages. Learn the package managers and the commands to build the Docker file for Python or for Golang and for Ruby and for Node.js, maybe some React and NPM stuff. So this is really more about the commands to build applications, the commands to run applications, and the commands to install dependencies. Those are different. You know, Java has Maven. Is it Maven? No. What is it? What is the? I forget the tool. Every ecosystem of a programming language has their own tools. You know, Node.js and some of those communities have NPM. We've got gems over on the Ruby side. And so you need to familiarize yourself with how those things are built, how you install dependencies, and then how you pin or set the version of those dependencies. So if you're installing a PHP app, you might need pair or another PHP dependency installer to install those things inside a Docker file. So for a DevOps engineer, this is really important to learn. You don't have to know how to program in those languages. With Go, you don't have to know how to program in it, but you want to know how the Docker file works, why those steps are necessary for that programming language, because eventually you're going to run into situations where dependencies fail to install, or there's a security vulnerability inside of your dependencies in your image. And you're going to need to work with the dev team, the ops team, whoever you have in your company. You need to work with them on how to fix it. The more you know about this stuff, the better, but you don't have to know how to program in the language. Now, of course, on your pursuit to all knowledge of all things tech, programming is helpful. Learning a language is helpful. A lot of people recommend Python as the first language. I'm not so sure. I think that if you don't know Bash and Bash scripting, learn that. That will serve you your whole career. Bash is very common in DevOps and in operations. Bash, and basically what I mean is shell scripting at any shell, right? SH shell, whatever, ZSH, whatever your shell of choice is, they're all going to have a common language that you would like to be able to know how to read and write for automation. And you can try to get away from that. You know, Docker and Kubernetes help us not have so much bash, and then you have to learn YAML and Docker files. But I think that bash will serve you the rest of your life. As long as you're in tech, you're going to be using Linux or Mac or Windows, and they all now have bash shells, SH shells, whether it's ASH, ZSH, Fish, whatever. All those shells have a core language there. So I would use that first. If you're done with that, you know that, and you want to pick your next language, pick one that you're excited about, whether it's Golang or Python or Node.js. Node.js, I had a lot of experience with years ago, almost over a decade ago, really. And so that was one of the languages I learned, but I had to learn it to do a job. And then in a previous job, I had to learn PHP 20 years ago to do that job. ASP.NET, I had to learn that 10, 15 years ago to do a job. So I have that experience, but I don't use those languages every day now because I'm mostly doing DevOps stuff. So I would say learning a little bit at a time is a good foundation. And I prefer, when I hire engineers for working on projects, what I want to know is if they know how an app runs. If I give you a WAR file for Java, how do you run that? How do you install dependencies? Do you know what files to look for? Do you know what a pip file is? Do you know what a package JSON file is? If you know what these files are, it really will help you take developers' applications and put them in containers and run them on servers. That's one of our jobs, and that will really help. You don't have to know all the language files and how all those work. So that's a great question. I'm glad you asked it. It's a great question. Yeah, that's true. These are all true. All these statements. Yeah, Python is simpler. Oops. Yeah, Python is simpler. There's so much Python stuff out there that it's like, if you're going to learn a language, just learn Python. I'm not a huge fan of Python. I am more of a fan of compiled languages. Yes, there are C compilers for Python, stuff like that, but I do like the more modern languages that are designed sort of for distributed computing first, like Go. So that's just my preference. If I was going to be a full-time developer, I would probably be looking at Go and Rust jobs, not because I'm smart in them. I would have to definitely learn Rust, but because I feel like leading edge teams, you know, that are doing the latest stuff, they're looking at Golang and Rust. Of course, now that we have WebAssembly and WASM and the cloud native WASM, which you can watch on the Docker events recently. By the way, I'm going to be talking about WASM next week. If you're interested more in WebAssembly stuff, there's already a video on Docker's channel. Myself, Nigel Poulton, we get into it about WebAssembly, but I'm going to be doing a video about that next week on YouTube, I think. So, yes, this is absolutely true. Ask 5 people what languages you should learn. You'll get 5 different answers. That's absolutely true. Yeah, thanks, Roberto. I appreciate it. Get on that waiting list. I'm looking forward to launching that course. Happy holidays there. Happy holidays. Merry Christmas to everyone. Giving well wishes. It looks like Kubernetes and many components are open source projects. Are companies using them in production, or is it recommended to go with enterprise solutions of Kubernetes? I'd say that any Kubernetes distribution that I know of is being used in production somewhere. So I wouldn't really worry about whether one is more production ready than the other. I would worry about which one aligns with your team goals. If you're in a cloud, use that cloud's Kubernetes. If you're in a data center, look at your existing vendors. You're probably using VMware, look at Tanzu. Probably want to look at aligning your tool sets, especially if you're in operations or in DevOps where you're managing all this infrastructure. You're going to want to look at which one aligns with the tools you already have, the vendors you already have partnerships with or relationships with. And so if you're already working with Ubuntu, for example, Canonical, if you're already working with them on support for Ubuntu servers, then you might want to look at their Kubernetes distributions first before you go looking at Rancher or something else. That's just how I approach it, and that's how most of the teams I work with approach it. But yeah, absolutely, it's all ready for production. Like, people have been, and they're at the end of the day, they're all Kubernetes. They're all using the same Kubernetes open source components. They're just layering some fancy stuff on top of it, and that is definitely stable for production. I mean, entire clouds are built on Kubernetes. So let me make sure I didn't skip any of these questions. Thanks for that definition on Raft there. I want to know more about rewriting annotations in Ingress. Okay. I don't really have any resources immediately available for you. Sorry about that, Prince. Yeah, I'm trying to think if we had a show on that this year. Yeah, I'm not sure we really did. I mean, we had some Ingress tools on. You can always go and look for Ingress stuff on my channel. If you just go to bret.live. We've had a show every week, and there's several Ingress shows on this year, but I don't think we had one specifically on rewriting annotations. So. Okay, someone else is agreeing with me on feeling like we're seeing more of Argo out there, and it might just be a marketing thing. They're a new startup company behind Argo now, so they're probably trying to market it out there. I don't know if it's true, but the people I work with and the customers I have, the people I talk to in the community, most of us are using Argo. Not all of us. Still, plenty of people. I'd say it's like 3 to 1. But that's just in my worldview. That's just the people I know. So it could be totally different in a different community. Yeah, if you watch Advent of Code, the top people tend to use Python or Ruby. Yeah, and Python and Ruby are very mature, been around a long time, and they have very, very large communities. I actually have a lot of friends in the Ruby community, and they just do Rails all day. Like, anything they're going to make it in Rails, Ruby on Rails. They're going to do that. That's their way of doing it. Like, it doesn't matter what new languages come out, they're just productive on Ruby. So they stick with it. The year of the Linux desktop. Are we doing predictions for 2023 now? I think that we talked about this several weeks ago. If you go back in this channel, we had a best of DevOps for the year 2 weeks ago. And I think, to me, 2023 is the year of AI and DevOps, probably. We've got enough tools now that, all this AI chat stuff, AI, writing blog posts, it's in our VS Code and now other code editors through GitHub Copilot. We've got other tools. Notion, my Notion writing app, has got a beta for AI written content. So I think next year will be the year where we more and more of our tools are using machine learning and big data to make decisions on our behalf. And that's, I think, in the future, what we're all going to be doing is managing the AI more than we're actually doing the work. The things we're doing today are a precursor to that. But I think as you get bigger and bigger, more containers, more servers, you're going to need to manage this fleet of stuff with less people, because that's what we're doing, right? DevOps is the goal is that if you had 3 people to run your DevOps team this year, you're either going to need to do twice as much stuff with those 3 people or do the same amount of stuff with less people next year. This is the race that we're on, right? I used to take a team of 8 people I used to run that to just manage the servers in the data center. And I watched over the course of 6 years that team of 8 people go to 2 because we had better tooling, we had more automation, we had better systems in place, and so people were moving on to do different jobs because we didn't need them anymore. That's what AI is going to do for us. It's not going to remove us, it's not going to remove the need for us, but we're going to have to become experts in the tools that start making decisions for us. Anyway, I think that's going to be a trend in 2023. I don't really have any tools to watch there. I think we've got some tools claiming to use machine learning AI stuff, but I'm not really sure yet how that's going to happen for DevOps. If you have opinions on that, by the way, if you have tools that you know about that you're seeing some of this automation showing up where it's making decisions, right? So imagine an AI, basically, I just point it to a repo and it kind of does what, you know, Heroku might do, right? It finds a Docker file, it auto builds it, it minifies it, it scans it for vulnerabilities, it removes the vulnerabilities or updates them if it can, and then it finds which cluster it thinks I need to run those in, and then it picks the right cluster, it puts it in that cluster, it sets up staging and production automatically, and I didn't have to set up my own manual automation to do that, right? Then it automatically eventually figures out that I could save money on different servers, so it swaps out the servers. Like, imagine one system that kind of starts to do all that for you. And so it's making things cheaper, it's making things faster, it's taking your code, it's putting it in secure servers, it's increasing security, it's reducing vulnerabilities, and it's doing all of that stuff without you having to manually do each step. I think that's the future of the DevOps tooling. And we just need some of these tools to mature. And you might have a bunch of different open source tools, but maybe you have some sort of proprietary AI on top of that that's managing all those tools. And that's kind of how I hope this all goes. I hope that this eventually gets way easier and that we don't need an expert for every team in order to understand how to build slim, secure container images, find the right clusters, run them in secure ways, monitor them, make sure that they're always available. Like, there's a lot going on there, right? If you had to do this yourself today, that's a dozen tools. You'd have to have a lot of different tools. You have to connect them all together. You'd have to connect API endpoints and have webhooks. And that stuff is tedious and boring. And I think that the AI is hopefully going to solve a lot of that. So, hey, thank you. All right, we got a super chat. Thank you so much. Sudarshan, sorry if I mispronounced that. I'm going to try. Sudarshan. Sorry, I'm probably messing that up. Thank you so much for that super chat. I really appreciate it. Can I repeat what Argo is? Yes, Robert. Argo is a set of tools that automate your container stuff, and usually around Kubernetes. So if you go just to the Argo project and we bring that up, they have 3 or 4 main tools. Really, the one that everyone knows about is Argo CD. And that is something that goes in your Kubernetes cluster, and it watches either your Git repos or your image registries, and it watches for new things, and then it pulls that stuff down and pushes it to Kubernetes. So it's the way that I always deploy my containers now in Kubernetes. If I'm going to do Kubernetes, I'm going to do Argo. If I can't use Argo, I'm going to use Flux. And then they have other tools like Workflows, which is essentially an automation solution that you can run on your own. You can host it. Rollouts is essentially a fancy version of deploying updates to your application. So if you need more advanced type style deployments like Canary, Blue-Green, all these different types that Kubernetes doesn't support out of the box, you can do that with rollouts. And then you have events. This is basically a Kubernetes custom event tool that allows you to do things based on events inside of Kubernetes. So the tool that by far most people are using out of this toolbox is Argo CD. That's the one that I'm teaching starting next month. And then these other ones came along after the fact, I think. I think CD was the first one, but they're all being run under the Argo project. And now what we're seeing is Acuity, the company behind Argo, or they're sponsoring a lot of the Argo work. They're creating a cloud-hosted version of this stuff so that you don't have to deploy it yourself, and you can run mini clusters easier with a centralized console. We had this team on the show earlier this year. Go up to Bret.live, search in my backlog of live streams for Acuity, and they were on the show. Yeah, I think you're right, Martin. I think I do see Flux used a lot more in large environments where they need a streamlined, super efficient solution. I definitely see that with Flux, for sure. Yeah, as DevOps, I will need to deal with all of the language. Yes, you will at some point have to touch every language. Yes, I agree. I agree with the statement there. Definitely more Argo CD as a GitOps workflow. You should pick one based on how your team works. Yes, we use Flux because it fits with our flow. I agree. It's one of those things where if you're going to just pick a tool and you don't know anything about both, just pick a default one, pick Argo by default. And then if it doesn't fit your team, then maybe check out Flux. There are obviously blog posts and stuff that compare the tools. It's a little bit of a moving target because if you focus on features, they both keep adding features. So it sometimes is difficult to look at a 3-year-old, 2-year-old blog post, something like that, and then really understand the difference. My attitude a lot of times is I get a general consensus of what the players are in the market. I get a sense for what maybe others are using or what's more popular, and then I'll use that one. Not because it's the right one, I just use it. And then when I need to do something that it doesn't seem to do for me, or it seems really complicated, or it's a problem to do what I want to do, I will try to look at the other tools. I don't try to learn them all at the same time. Like, that's definitely not something I recommend. GitHub Copilot for writing code locally. My GitHub Copilot writes my comments in my READMEs. But yeah, I mean, it's funny how Copilot, I forget that it's there. And then I'll start writing something and then it fills it in for me. And it's always, I wouldn't say it's always right, but it always helps. It's not going to replace my knowledge, at least not yet. I still have to know what a correct Docker file looks like, what a correct function in JavaScript looks like. I have to know those things. But it definitely gets me quicker to my answer, and I absolutely recommend Copilot to everyone who's professional in this job. Like, even if you're just doing DevOps and you're not a programmer, check out Copilot. I think it's still worth it. And I didn't realize it, but recently, I guess it still works. It works with NeoVim now. I haven't used it in NeoVim, but NeoVim is my Vim of choice. And I was excited to learn that Copilot has some sort of add-on. And I actually want to try that out because I would like to see what Vim looks like when it's writing for me inside of Vim. That sounds fun. Can I create a course for KCNA? I love that you want me to make more courses, so thank you. I do not have a plan for that yet. If those of you, if you're wanting me to create a KCNA, throw a thumbs up in chat, give a thumbs up to this video, and I will take that into consideration when we start planning out the courses after this new live course. So my first quarter of the year is already booked. So we'll have to see later next year what I do. And a lot of times that's just what the students are asking for. So thank you for telling me that. I think that is my first request for the KCNA. But I am interested in it. So I don't do certification courses yet. I don't really have any course that's designed for a certification. I want to do them. I just don't make the time for them. I'm so busy with all this other stuff. So, some of my videos, Kashan says, some of your videos on your Docker course are not working on Udemy. So tell me more. Well, first off, if it's not playing in your browser, I can't do anything about that. You'll have to contact Udemy support. That's support.udemy.com. If you have problems playing videos, or because they all work for me, I test them constantly. I'm in the course every day helping students. I'm tweaking things. For example, I just added a new lecture days ago to explain an assignment so that there was some confusion in one of the assignments. So I put in another lecture to explain what's happening. I also had someone recommend that I revise some of the quizzes. So there's a particular quiz question that was confusing for a couple of people, so I edited that. But I play videos a lot, and they always work for me. Sometimes people have problems with proxy. If your problem is something different, if you're talking about that you can't actually get something to work the way that it works for me, put it either in Discord. We have dedicated chat rooms in Discord. You also have the Q&A in the course. Or if you just want to give me the details of the problem here, maybe I can figure out live here. But happy to help. I just don't know. I need more information in order to help you. All right. So anyone watching, has anyone taken the KCNA? I have not taken it. Yeah, what we're talking about here is the one of the newer certifications. I have not taken this one, so I don't know anyone that has, so I don't really know what the experience is like. All right, well, I'm waiting for any more feedback from Kishan or my question, the KCNA. What are your thoughts on newsletters? So I have a newsletter. It's a little bit old and stale. It's at newsletter.bretfisher.com. So I'm on review. This is my newsletter of choice. And they are shutting down next month. Twitter is, firing everybody. So Twitter owns review, and they're shutting down review. Ironically, because one of the founders, Jack, actually just started his own review newsletter weeks ago, and then Twitter announced that they're shutting it down. So it's pretty funny. It's sad. I really like the platform, but I haven't put out an issue in a while. I've been on Patreon. So that's normally where I'm at, and where you could become a member and support this work and get my weekly updates. But like someone suggested, what we're thinking about in the new year is moving the newsletter over to my main website, and it has a built-in newsletter functionality. It also has a built-in membership platform. So we are thinking about ways of simplifying and consolidating all this at the same time as making the newsletters something more valuable for you. So let me know your opinions. Do you like Patreon? Do you prefer just paying for memberships on YouTube? I'm not planning on a paid newsletter, so I don't really want to do Substack because I don't plan on doing full-time newsletters. That's why I do these videos. I do videos. I'm a video guy. So I'm not great at writing newsletters, but I do want to have a place for us to all get the news, because not everybody's on Twitter, and who knows what the future of Twitter is. I no longer really do Facebook. So I need a place to communicate, and Discord is great. We're on Discord every day, obviously, but it's not a great place to send out news or information on who's my guest going to be, all that stuff. So we're working on a couple of things. One of them is we're working on a calendar of the scheduled people on the show, so you can look ahead and see what shows you want to watch. And I'm also looking at a way to just consolidate a lot of these things into one place. So we're thinking of putting it all on our own website. You tell me what you think. I don't know if you remember, I did reviews newsletters until like 2 years ago, and then I stopped doing them. So anyway, I'll wait for those answers in chat. Sujay asked a question of, is it possible, could you explain WebAssembly with Kubernetes? Yes, in fact, that's something I plan to do for next week. It may not happen, but I plan on putting out a video on cloud native WebAssembly. I have opinions, and I think that WebAssembly is important, and that we all should be vaguely aware of it right now. It's still very, very early, so you don't have to go and learn how to develop and make applications into WebAssembly. If you're DevOps or a sysadmin, if you're in that side like I am, you need to be aware that WebAssembly is coming and what you need to do about it in containers. And I'm excited about this because for many reasons, it's faster, smaller, more secure. There's just a lot of potential, but it's so early that if you're a developer in your language, it might be more painful to turn your application into a WebAssembly binary. The whole point of all this is that WebAssembly used to be for the browser only, but we have many ways now to run WebAssembly outside of the browser, meaning that you can take a binary, a WASM binary, and you can run it on a server, run it as a command line utility. And when you run it, you're only running a single binary file. You don't have to have 1,000 files and all these dependencies for your application anymore when you ship it to servers. You can just send a single WASM binary. And what Docker has done, and the Containerd and Kubernetes community, is that they have circled the wagons around this idea and said, hey, WebAssembly has the potential. It's more secure by default. It can be much, much smaller than your regular images. And it can be more, it can actually be faster due to the way that the programming languages cache and preload things into the processor and memory. So it has the potential to be faster as a precompiled app, which is amazing because you could still develop in Ruby or Python or Node.js or whatever your language and frameworks, and possibly run server-side code outside of the browser in a more secure and a faster way and with a much smaller footprint. That's the goal. So right now what we're able to do is in Docker Desktop today, you're able to do a Docker run and a Docker build on a WASM type binary. Now Docker and Kubernetes are not going to build your app or make it WebAssembly. That's up to the developer. If the developer produces an output of a WASM binary, what can happen now as of today is Docker Desktop can now run that in a container without you having to do special things. You don't have to download a runtime because Docker will now include that. So anyway, I've got a whole video that I'm planning on making. If you want to see, Docker did an all hands weeks ago, and I made a video with Nigel Poulton, and we both know a little bit about WebAssembly. So we came together, shared our knowledge. There's a lot more smarter people than us out there, but what we are paying attention to is that Containerd has now accepted a WASM runtime into CNCF, and there's now an official package. I'm not sure if they got the votes they needed, but Containerd will now start shipping with the ability to run WebAssembly binaries in a container, and that even allows us to run many different WASM binaries on a server at the same time with the typical container isolation that we all know. What this enables us to do is to ship WASM apps to our servers in Kubernetes without having to change anything. We don't have to change our workflows. We don't have to change our pipelines and our CI automation. We simply build it like a container image, we store it like a container image, and then we run it like a container image. But in the inside, it's not technically running a traditional container, it's running a WASM container. That's what the future is. I'm excited about it, and you'll see some more stuff maybe next week. So come back next week for that. But thanks to you, Jay, for that question. That was great. Curated weekly info in a newsletter is always interesting. Yes, and one I can recommend to you is DevOps-ish. So I'd like to call him a friend. The founder of DevOps-ish, Chris Short. So let me show you DevOps-ish over here. Let's switch screens. This is a great newsletter and podcast that does summaries of tech, specifically around DevOps, obviously, since the title. Chris is a key member in a lot of the cloud native communities. He's one of the founding members, or key members at the early days of GitOps. And so check out his content. I love his stuff. He does a lot of work on this, and that's a great newsletter, since my newsletter is a little out of date. And I was never really great at the hours of weekly effort it takes on summarizing all that stuff. So if I do something, if I rebuild the newsletter back up again, it'll really just be my take. It won't really be like a survey of all the things. It'll just say, hey, I learned about these things this week. It almost is going to be like, this week I learned by Bret. Because it needs to be simple and quick, right? I don't have a lot of time to spend hours a week on a newsletter. So check that one out if you want a really solid newsletter. I support him. I actually volunteer to give him a little bit of money to thank him because he does such a great amount of work there. So I would check that out. Oh yeah. Oh, on Brave. Oh, that's a good piece of information there, Kishan. Good job in fixing it. It's always nice when you fix your own problems. Yeah. So Brave being a custom, I think it's Chromium based, right? Brave, another browser, and evidently it blocks somehow the Udemy videos. I do know that Udemy is experimenting with DRM in their videos. So for example, if you try to record the screen of a video in Safari or Chrome, it won't record the video in Udemy because they're starting to add in some of this DRM stuff, which means that not all browsers are going to play it correctly. Hello, Farouk. Hopefully I said that correctly. Season's greetings. Happy Hanukkah. Merry Christmas. Yeah, you're using Rancher Desktop? Cool. Yep, there's lots of choices now. You're wondering about Podman. Well, Podman released Podman Desktop this year. I have not compared Podman and Podman Desktop to all the features of Rancher Desktop. However, I'm looking for some help. So this, if you look over here, this is the Podman Desktop. So in my opinion, we now have at least 3 major tools supported by major companies to run containers on your local system. We have Docker Desktop, Rancher Desktop, Podman Desktop. There's plenty of other options out there, and I have a spreadsheet on this. And I will send this link. I'll put this, actually it's this link. But I have a spreadsheet, and I'm trying to keep the feature list updated. So if you know some more about Rancher Desktop, or if you learned something about Podman Desktop, I would love to get support here. The whole point of the spreadsheet is to help you understand the feature differences between these tools, because right now that I know of, there's no one really keeping track of all this. So I have a spreadsheet, and you're allowed to add comments. So if you know about a feature or something that Podman or Podman Desktop or some other tool uses, please add comments in there. I will see the comments, and I'll help review and critique or curate this spreadsheet. So I don't know all these tools that well. I need your help to know what features work and which ways, so you can kind of see that it maybe, if it doesn't maybe all work, I give it a yellow. If it does work, we give it a green. And if it doesn't work, if we know that it's not a feature or know it doesn't work right, then we give it a red little mad face there. So check that out. You know, they've got things like, does it support QEMU for running a different architecture workload? Does it support Swarm? Does it have functionality that adds into VS Code? Can VS Code utilize it for running containers? What is the performance like when you bind mount code from your host operating system? You know, there's lots of considerations. I'm just not smart enough on all these tools. And since Podman Desktop is so new, I need help. I need someone that has used it to really come in here. The other thing, by the way, Podman Desktop supports Docker extensions, which I think is really cool that Podman Desktop does that. That you can write an extension for Docker Desktop, and then you can use it in Podman Desktop. The extensions is one of the best things of this year for Docker. So please check that out. And if you have any comments, if you know specifically something about a feature, pros and cons, throw them in a comment, and I will check it out. And thanks for the help. I appreciate it. I like the community support here, so let's do it. Stands back. Does WASM reduce the need for Golang as a cloud-native language, specifically the single binary advantage? That's an interesting topic. So one of the best things about the latest languages and the modern way that we develop applications, this is a little bit of a soapbox moment, so stick with me. If you look at the last 40 plus years of languages and software design. And we're just going to talk about Linux for right now. So for Linux and Unix operating systems, we have designed the way we write languages, the way we compile code, the way we ship code. It has all been around the limitations at the time. So when you go back very early days, the languages of C, stuff like that, we needed more tooling to move beyond C. So C was that very powerful low-level language, and C++. And then sort of in the late 90s with PHP, and then we had ASP, if you remember classic ASP, and then we got to .NET, Ruby showed up, eventually Node.js showed up, JavaScript was obviously a browser language in the 90s. But you started to see these just-in-time compiled languages show up because of the problems of the day, all right? Those problems being around how we architect software, how they run on servers, and we were trying to solve problems like the just-in-time compiled languages. We're trying to solve certain problems that may not be a problem today. And if we look forward till, sorry, my camera's waving. If we look to today and we look past 20 years, we realize that certain things are true today that they weren't true back then, right? We have really good methodologies for testing and understanding code before we ship it. So teams are able to work with pull requests and changes, and we merge into branches, and we understand this workflow at the same time that storage has gotten really fast and cheap, and CPU time has gotten really a ton faster, right? We can compile things way faster than we used to. So you don't have to wait 30 minutes to compile your application before you can test it. We don't necessarily have to worry about compile time things happening. And at the same time, we don't now necessarily need to break out everything into library files. If you look at the architecture of Linux and a lot of Unix languages, and where we had this concept of everything is a library and everything is installed once inside the system, and we rely on other libraries, we rely on SSH libraries, and we use external libraries outside of our own binaries. Well, the problems of today are we're all trying to ship code faster and update faster. We want to do it a dozen times a day, 100 times a day. So when you look at the modern problems of distributed computing, cheap CPU, cheap storage, it turns out that today it's easier and better for a team to use a precompiled language, and what we end up with on the server is a very small set of binaries or libraries that we've compiled in all our dependencies. It turns out that that's faster to start, it's easier to maintain, instead of sending 200,000 files to the server, you're sending 1 or 2 files to the server. And because you're going to replace those in a couple of hours anyway. So you're not going to have the benefit of system libraries and containers anymore. We're not all using the same Python libraries in the same root host system. So it turns out with containers and the way that we're all deploying them now, it's probably a better idea that we precompile our code into small binaries, including all of our dependencies, and we just talk natively to the kernel. That's what Go does, Rust does, C obviously does it. A lot of languages have a compiler that will compile to C, but WASM allows us to build any language into an architecture agnostic binary that only needs a runtime to run. And guess what Docker and Kubernetes do? They manage your runtimes for you. So if Docker and Kubernetes are going to deliver runtimes, whether that's Containerd or CRI-O or Podman, or now a WASM, like a WASM time, WASM Edge or WASM time, or one of the other WASM runtimes, the runtimes are managed by the infrastructure now. All you have to do is get your code to the runtime in a container image. So if that's all true, then it seems like WASM, which is architecture independent, you don't have to rebuild it for ARM or Intel. You don't have to have 2 different versions of the image. You can just have one image, it runs everywhere, as long as that platform has a WASM runtime. So now you have easier time of architecture deployments. You can run it everywhere. Now you can compile it all down into a single file that's way smaller than your original source code. And the WebAssembly world defaults with a much more restrictive run environment, which is what we need. We need more security on our servers. We need things to be more secure by default. And Wasm does that as well. So there's a lot of benefits there. The real negative of all of it right now is that the tooling and the features aren't always there. For example, Wasm doesn't run as well for every language. It doesn't do multi-threading yet. It doesn't have a lot of the networking out of the box that you would expect. So there's this thing called WASI, Wasm System Interface, essentially is what that stands for. And that is evolving, and it's very, very new. And it's evolving, and it's hopefully going to make it possible for you to take any application, build it into a binary, a Wasm binary ahead of time, and ship that in your images. And then your servers use less storage, the applications start faster, they're defaulting to be more secure, there's less vulnerabilities because there's less unnecessary dependencies. It's just a win for everyone. So hopefully that makes sense. So I don't know if I answered that question. So I guess the answer is yes, it does reduce Golang, as maybe some of the advantages are less pronounced. However, Golang has lots of other benefits and lots of other reasons to use it in open source. You know, we're not always going to be running everything in a container. So maybe you're running a local utility and you want Golang to run that. Golang is really great at making command line utilities. So it's really easy to do that. There's lots of other benefits too, including the prevalence of it in open source. So I wouldn't just go pick some arbitrary language and do that just because it can build to Wasm. And again, Wasm's very new. So we're probably years away from seeing teams like the average person building a JavaScript application and a Ruby application and a Go application, and they all end up showing up as Wasm binaries on a server. That's probably years away, just because there's not all the tooling works. You know, Docker just added tooling a month ago, 2 months ago. Like it's pretty new. So I would stay curious. I would not necessarily run out and try to shift your production workloads yet. Kubernetes hasn't really settled on the exact way we should be doing this. What I hope is going to happen is that Kubernetes on any particular node can have Wasm and other languages all running side by side in the same container daemon, container runtime. That's not really true today. The way you do it today typically means you have to have a node pool that's dedicated to Wasm. And I hope that we don't end up with that, because I want it to be more flexible. I want I want containerd to switch out from runc to Wasm runtime whenever I want, right? I want it to use Wasm Edge and runc or whatever on the same platform, on the same server at the same time, and run all these things together. I want to be able to run multiple containers in the same pod and have one of them be Wasm, like the proxy maybe, or the logging tool. And then the app itself, maybe it's a traditional app, maybe it's Java, and I want that to run in the same pod together. You can't really do that yet. So there's lots of stuff that needs to be ironed out before we can all just start doing Wasm all day long. Hopefully that helps. Yeah. So, well, I mean, that's true. The Docker plugin is not dependent upon Docker or Rancher Desktop, but it does need to have access to a Docker socket. And not all these tools on that list give you a Docker socket on Mac, for example. They don't all have the Docker binary compatibility in terms of the Docker command line or the Docker API. So it kind of depends. Hey, thanks, Dan. I appreciate the super sticker. Thank you so much. Hopefully I helped with the answers. Martin asks, so WebAssembly is like Java and the JDK. Yeah, a little bit. It's kind of, I think it's definitely a language, it has the potential to be a language agnostic version of the JDK. I think the JDK never really became what we hoped it would be, It's still, I think, pretty complex, and obviously it only supports the Java, at least my understanding is that it only supports the Java language. The goal of WASM, or WebAssembly, is that it supports any language that adheres to the standard, and it can run on any platform without needing a bunch of extra work, right? You technically can do that with JDK, but what happens today in an image with Java, you ship the JDK or the JRE, you ship that with your image, right? With WASM, it's not in your image. The only thing in your image is the binary, the WASM binary that it compiled of your app, and any dependent files. You know, maybe it's a web service, so you need all the HTML pages and all that stuff, right? So that's different because technically the image doesn't have the runtime in it, which I think is a very interesting distinction, because everything else we've been doing, Java, Node.js, Python, Ruby, the runtime ships with your code. All the system, that's why we have to have the shell and apt and the system dependencies, all that stuff has to be in the image because that application is depending on all those files to run. But in Golang, when we build a binary in Golang, we don't need Golang installed, right? We can use Scratch because it's compiled in the binary. With WASM, it's not doing either one of those things. It still needs the runtime, but the runtime is managed by your container runtime, not by the image. And that's really unique. We don't really have anything else doing that. Basically what we have today is Containerd and Cryo and Docker and Podman. They all run C or crun, two different variants of the same thing, which essentially runs a POSIX style interface for running a binary. So technically, yes, the Linux kernel is kind of providing the runtime, and the namespace and C groups are obviously created by Containerd and all that stuff. But I think the WASM idea provides a way for us to just have this very easy way to ship applications. You don't need anything in the image. You start from scratch, you copy in the binary, the WASM binary, it's usually a .wasm file, and any other things you need for that binary. But all the dependencies are in that binary and the runtime isn't there. It's just ignored. And when you get to the server has the runtime already installed. That's the future. I don't know if that's how it's going to play out, but that's the idea that Docker and Containerd and the Kubernetes community have. I hope that's the future. I hope we don't have to ship the WASM runtimes with our app. There might be a reason to do that sometimes. Maybe if you're running you want to run a beta version of a runtime, so you need that. But the idea right now is that you don't have to worry about it. It just ships with your container runtimes. It's included. That's how I hope it works. Hopefully that helps. So no, I'm actually disagreeing with you. The WASM runtime is not installed in the image. The image is literally a Scratch image and a binary. But that binary can't be run without the runtime. The runtime has to be on the server. And right now, WASMtime and WASM Edge are the two that I see being shown as used with Kubernetes and stuff. And what Containerd is going to be doing is using them as plugins. And it has a little shim in the middle called Run WASI that they created for the Containerd project. And so Containerd, outside of the container image and outside of the container itself, Containerd will run your WASM as a special type of container so that you can avoid the runtime. That's what makes it different than the JDK, because we always still had to ship the JDK with the app. And hopefully with WASM, what we can do, and granted we're very early days, but what we can do is the runtime becomes an infrastructure decision. The people running the infrastructure will decide what runtimes are on the node and what you can run on each node, right? And when you run something, if you didn't know this today, you already have a platform set in the metadata of your image. But when you build a WASM image, it changes that platform from something like Linux/AMD 64 or Linux/ARM 64. right? Those are platforms, and each one of your images always has to have that. But with WASM, it's now going to say WASI/WASM, and it's not going to have Linux. It's not going to say Windows. It's not going to tell you the CPU architecture type, because those things don't matter, because the runtime is on the server. If we had to ship the runtime in the image, then that image would become platform specific, and it would then go back to just being a Linux/AMD 64 image, and you'd have to run it only on an AMD 64 Linux server. Excuse me. So that's the difference here. I'm going to do more videos on this and explain it better, but hopefully that makes sense. I think that's what's really unique about it, and it allows us to, if you need a new version of WASM, well, you got to tell your server admins to upgrade the server. There's pros and cons to that, but I think that's a more efficient model than us all constantly shipping runtimes in every image. We don't ship container D in our images, so why deliver the WASM runtime in the image? Ooh, Stan's got some insight there. His PhD thesis on writing a complete cloud-native OS in WASM. That's pretty cool. Yeah, the people that the people that start talking about WASM and the WebAssembly core infrastructure underneath it, the ideas and the principles of the standards. I hear a lot of talk about unikernels and the idea that by default WebAssembly apps don't even have access to the file system. They don't have access to the network. And so the WASM community is having to build all these different pieces to make it more versatile, to make it more universal. And I'm excited. 2023 is going to be a good year for that, I think. Yeah. So there's already a video that Nigel and I did over on the Docker channel, but I'm going to make my own, hopefully a shorter one. Maybe not shorter, but a different video from that. So stay tuned, stay tuned. If you subscribe to this channel, we're going to start using shorts in this channel, by the way. So there's going to be more shorts and there's going to be more communications coming out, especially if you're a member. I've released my first member-only video, kind of give you some background on the studio and how I do my live streams, in case you're interested in that. You can become a member here on YouTube to see that video. For those of you that are on Patreon or one of my other membership ways, I will be sending that video out. I don't have a date yet, but I'm going to be sending that video out to you too on some of the background on my studio. It's like a 3-minute video, but I did it last week. Aditi, sorry about that, mispronouncing your name there, but talk about Terraform. Well, I don't know what you need to know. Terraform is my preferred language for managing cloud infrastructure. So typically when I'm working with a customer, they've got Terraform. Like, it's almost impossible to automate and do DevOps things without Terraform. So there are other competitors, right? You've got other tools that can do similar things, but usually they're going to have Terraform in some capacity. So what's your specific question? I use Terraform to create Kubernetes clusters in the cloud. I use Terraform instead of cloud formation, right? I don't want to use a cloud-specific tool unless I have to. So I like Terraform and all of its providers so that I can do that automation. But yeah, what's your questions? There's plenty of people here. By the way, if you have more questions that I don't answer in this show, go over there to the Discord server. We're hanging out 24 hours a day, 12,000 plus DevOps people, all learning DevOps, using DevOps daily. So go hang out and ask your questions there if I don't give you good answers. Ooh, here's a question that I get very often. I like the name Whoopi. I am 21. I want to become a DevOps engineer. What do you think I should go for as a career? By the way, I have RHCSA, a Red Hat cert, and good grip on Ansible and Docker. Sorry for asking out of topic. No, that's perfect. That's a great question for here. Thank you for showing up. So I have my own little list of opinions on DevOps. I do not have a course that teaches you end-to-end DevOps yet. People in chat will tell you that they've probably taken other courses from other people that have even been on this show make courses, like Tech World with Nana. She's been on this show in the last year. She has a DevOps course that you can check out. But let me give you my link. Yeah, so I have a link on my opinions around DevOps. Oops. Let me put the correct URL in there. So, but there are definitely courses out there. I'd say once you learn Docker, if you know cloud, if you know how to manage some of the major things in a cloud, just pick a cloud, AWS. Do you know how to use EC2? Do you know how to use networking, security, load balancing, monitoring, logging, databases, object storage like S3? Those are just the basics. So just learn those tools, understand why they exist, learn some Terraform on how to deploy them and create them. And then once you understand Docker, you're going to need an automation platform. I think the automation platform of 2022 is GitHub Actions, which is why I'm teaching a course on GitHub Actions starting next month. I'm going to put this up one more time, but I'm starting hopefully next month with a course on GitHub Actions for DevOps, and specifically for taking your repos of code, building them into Docker images, testing them, scanning them for CVE vulnerabilities, all that stuff, and then putting them up in a registry, and then automating their deployment using Argo to Kubernetes. That's the course. It's going to be live taught with you and me on Zoom with a small group of people. That starts next month. You can, if you weren't here earlier, then check out, here's the course link for that. You can get a coupon if you sign up early. If you get on the wait list, you can get a coupon for that. And that will help you with the automation side of things. So you need to know automation. I mean, one of the core tenets of DevOps is automation. So you've got to know tooling. It's okay if you know one, the other ones are going to be very similar. So once you've learned one, I think GitHub Actions is the best. It's the right one for now. 10 years ago, it was Jenkins. But Jenkins is declining in usage. I think it's on its way out. Jenkins is a sort of an older, more complicated way to do this. GitHub Actions and other tools like Circle CI are more modern, and Azure DevOps. These are more modern ways to do it. It's all hosted in the cloud. If you're a GitLab person, GitLab has a great DevOps ecosystem around it. So if you like GitLab, if you're on the GitLab platform, stick with that. They have a lot of automation built in. But if you keep your code on GitHub, I recommend GitHub Actions. So. But that's what I would do. And then once you have Docker, then learn Kubernetes. I think if you're claiming to be a DevOps professional, or you wanted to get into DevOps, knowing a cloud, knowing Bash scripting, know Linux, know networking, right? No, K-N-O-W, not N-O. Know some networking. Go take a networking course and get a networking certification, Network Plus, or AWS's networking certifications or whatever. I don't know if they have one like that, but you need to know networking really well. That will serve you your whole career. I got my Cisco certifications in the 90s, and I got my networking certifications in the 90s, and they still serve me today, almost 30 years later. I'm still using that fundamental knowledge of TCP, UDP, IP protocols, subnetting, routing, switching, virtual Ethernet interfaces, IP firewalls. These are all networking concepts that we all should know really well. So I expect my engineers to know that. They should know Linux pretty good. They don't have to be a pro, because the days of you building your own kernel and making your own distribution are gone, because most people don't need to know that anymore. 20 years ago, we did. You had to know how to install Wi-Fi drivers and get your video drivers working in Linux. And for some people, that's still a thing on your Linux desktops. But you don't need to know that to be a DevOps engineer. You can get away with knowing the shells, knowing a lot of the command line utilities, having some basic understanding of what the kernel is. And then you move up the stack. You learn Docker, you learn containers, then you learn Kubernetes, you learn cloud infrastructure, how to use Terraform to automate that. That's what you need to get into next. So hopefully that helps, and good luck on your job search. I have helped multiple people your age, helped them through the courses, through the Discord community. Get over there, hang out with the smart people over there. Read some of the articles every day. Just read one article a day, just one, that they are linking to in there. Check out that stuff. There's a lot going on in that community that will help you learn all of the little things in DevOps that you maybe don't learn in a Udemy course. So, and good luck. I'm excited to have another person in the DevOps community. All right, let's see what we got. Terraform versus Ansible. The answer to me is yes, both. Like Terraform, Ansible is better at managing things inside of Linux and Windows than Terraform, at least the last I checked. Terraform is better. I like Terraform for cloud infrastructure, managing all of the automation against remote APIs like AWS and Azure and DigitalOcean. Like those all have APIs, and I can manage them with Terraform. If I have to jump into the shell of a remote server and do things in there like install apt packages, manage security updates, install Docker, those kind of things, I will maybe use Ansible. We've got newer tools out like Pulumi and what's the other one? Popsicle. Oh shoot, Pulumi and I forgot the other one. Someone tell me in chat, I forget. We've got some new ideas in the community about how to manage infrastructure. Pulumi is one of them, but you have to be a developer to use Pulumi. If you're someone that came from sysadmin like me, you maybe don't feel confident enough to write all of your DevOps stuff in code because maybe your whole DevOps team doesn't write code. And so that's the problem with DevOps is if it's developers running infrastructure, they'll just pick the language of choice and they can write something like Pulumi. Crossplane, thank you, Brendan and Martin at the same time. And Crossplane is an interesting idea of how do I manage my infrastructure from inside Kubernetes, which is a pretty cool idea. I'm excited about that. So once you know a little bit of Ansible, I would say learn Terraform first, because as we get further into cloud infrastructure, we need to manage Linux less. The goal of DevOps for the future is that you're not managing Linux directly, that you're managing services, and those services take care of Linux for you. For example, if you use something like Fargate on EKS, you don't have to manage Linux anymore. If you're using, static websites or cloud automated Kubernetes systems where they take care of the nodes for you, or something like Google Cloud Run, these are all ways to remove the need to use Linux. And if you don't need to use Linux, then you probably don't need Ansible. So, if you don't have to manage servers themselves, you can probably avoid Ansible altogether and then only use Terraform, maybe a little bit of Bash shell scripting in there a little bit. And I'm not saying you shouldn't use Ansible. It's nice when you can avoid a tool that you don't need anymore. You can just not need to maintain that tool and all the scripting and stuff. And then who knows, maybe the future is going to be, maybe you'll be able to manage everything with a little bit of Kubernetes deployment automation and then Crossplane on top of that. Maybe a little bit of Pulumi and a little bit of Crossplane, and you don't need Terraform at all. Who knows what that future might be, but I think that the trend is to get yourself out of managing Linux servers all day long. If you have to patch Linux and restart servers, especially if they're in the cloud, there's probably now a better way to do that using cloud services. That's the point of using the cloud. We didn't all just stop at, okay, the cloud now deploys servers for me, I'm done, I can SSH in, that's all I need. That was sort of Gen 1 cloud. And now we're moving on to all these other things, right? We don't use file servers on servers as much anymore. We use object stores and stuff like that, or NFS services that are provided by the cloud. So the same thing is true of Linux servers. We're trying to get out of that, and not because it's not cool, but you're going to be told to do way more things. You're going to have way more responsibility, and you don't have time to manage all those Linux servers anymore. Let the cloud manage them for you. So I think that's the trend. Yeah, yeah. Ansible's better for stuff closer to bare metal. I would agree too. Most of the teams I work with still have to run something on a Linux server, and we've all got old stuff that's not moved on to the latest generation of our technology. So I work with teams all the time that have Terraform and Ansible. They have to use both because they're still maintaining servers. They still might have their own data centers, or they might have stuff on the edge. Where does Tekton fit into the spectrum versus GitHub Actions and Jenkins? I would love to hear other people's opinions because I don't have a strong opinion on Tekton. I don't work with anyone that uses it. So I don't have really any real world experience on it working with a team in Tekton. I know people that do. I have met people that use it, but I don't work with them. So I don't really have the real world experience to feel like I can give you a real answer. So somebody throw their opinions in there if they've used Tekton. Do you like it? Do you hate it? Like, what's your thoughts? I mean, GitHub Actions to me is a little low level, right? You have to write a lot of YAML. It's way better than Jenkins, but I don't think it's the end, because to me, the evolution of all this is eventually the AI is going to know what we need to have done. If you connect up an AI, and I've seen a couple of startups that are trying to do this, if I connect my AI, whatever that is, to the cloud and to my repos, why can't it eventually figure out what my automation needs to be? I mean, we all do the same thing. We're all taking code out of repos. We need to test it. We need to build it in the container images, and it needs to go into Kubernetes, or it needs to go into something in the cloud. Maybe it's not Kubernetes. Maybe it's ECS, or maybe it's Google Cloud Run, or all the other options out there. Maybe it doesn't necessarily need the Kubernetes manifest, but what if the AI just knew all that? Because you had all these services that you're using and it sees all that, it can understand, hopefully, I'm imagining this a future tool. If you're a startup, go make this happen. So why do I have to know each step of the puzzle every step of the way? Because right now, that's what GitHub Actions is. It's very manual. I have to just pick the pieces I want, and I have to put them in the right order, and I have to make all these pipelines and workflows. And I think that the days of us having to know that are numbered. I mean, we have a lot of these ideas around automation. And there's things like Tekton, or there's things like Dagger, right? From the founder, Solomon Hykes, the founder of Docker, who's on his newer startup, Dagger, and he's working with some of the original people from Docker and a team of people. And that is an idea of a platform agnostic automation so that it can run anywhere. And essentially you would run it inside of Jenkins or GitHub Actions or GitLab DevOps, or you would run it locally or wherever you need, but it would basically be this middle layer between the automation platform and what you need to actually get done. The goal of Dagger, in my understanding, is really the reason for Dagger is that you don't have to write, a lot of advanced teams have 2 or 3 different CI systems, right? They might have one that's near production, they might have one that's more developer friendly, they might end up with multiple automation platforms. So Dagger, that's Dagger.io, is an idea around what if you wrote everything in this specific language and tooling, and then it didn't matter what your CI platform was, they all just ran Dagger. And then underneath Dagger is your automation. So it's an interesting idea. I'm going to hopefully have them on the show next year, 2023. So I want to talk about it, but I wanted to let them iterate a little bit and get a more mature product before we dive into it, because they've been around a couple of years, and I'm not sure if they're really at a 1.0 release or anything yet. I'm not sure if they're calling it stable. So, but this is kind of what their idea is that the Dagger engine, like Docker made running all your applications a universal build and runtime. They're trying to do this for CI as well. I think one of the challenges with it is that you still have to know the thing it's going to run on. Like if you're going to run it on GitHub Actions or Circle CI, you still have to know those tools. So this is a net add tool. You have to know this in addition to those. That's a problem. I have a lot of teams that just don't have time to learn a new tool if it won't replace their old tools. So what I'm interested in is if they're able to come up with their own platform so that you don't have to run another CI solution underneath Dagger, that you can just run theirs and you can just use them completely. But that it also would benefit them to have it be compatible with every other system in case you needed to run it somewhere else. But I would be much more interested if they had their own cloud for this, as well as, oh yeah, we also work on Jenkins and GitHub Actions and GitLab. That would be cool. But we'll talk about that when they come on the show. I have not asked yet, so I will ask them hopefully soon to be on the show there. How would you compare GitLab automation, basically, to GitHub Actions automation? Well, by default, I mean, there's way more repos and code on GitHub. So there's going to be way more use of GitHub Actions. So it's really, to me, about where your code lives. If your code lives on GitLab, look at their solution first. If your code lives on GitHub, look at their solution first. You're always going to have, because of the power of GitHub and Microsoft money, you're always going to have more over at GitHub. Assuming that they had the same, if they have that same tool, right? They both now have automation tools. So what I find is if you go over to the GitHub marketplace, if I go to marketplace and I go to actions, right? There's 16,300 public actions on GitHub. I don't know what the GitLab DevOps Marketplace looks like. Let me see if I can find something. Yeah, so someone who's more versed on the GitLab would have to give a better explanation of exactly what the ecosystem is like on the GitLab DevOps stuff. But I don't even know enough to know if they have a marketplace. But I think the real power of GitHub Actions is that marketplace is growing rapidly. Every tool out there that has anything to do with CI or automation has a GitHub action. Docker's only official automation tools are on GitHub Actions. They don't make anything for GitLab or Circle CI or Azure DevOps. They only make it for GitHub Actions. Now, many people will say, well, that's okay because GitLab or Drone or Circle CI or whatever, they all have Docker builds, right? And they do. But a lot of times you'll find that they're using old methodologies, old versions. For example, with the GitHub action for Docker build, let me just pull this up. So if you look over here, this is Docker's official build and push image action. So they maintain this for GitHub Actions, and you can see over here on the right, it says created by Docker. And one of the things that I really love about this is that it has all these rich features. For example, it will automatically set up QEMU if I want, so I can build for multiple architectures without having dedicated worker nodes that have that architecture. So QEMU allows me to emulate ARM when I'm on an Intel CPU. So I can do that. It also has, let's see, what's the other thing? No. What am I looking for? It also uses BuildKit, by the way. So there's actual other CIs out there that don't use BuildKit, but BuildKit's such a better way to build a Docker image than the old builder that is sometimes still used by default in other CI solutions. If I go to actions inside of their here, so we'll see all these actions they've made. One of my favorite, thank you, Crazy Max. One of my favorites is the metadata action. And honestly, this thing is fantastic because what it does is it allows me to auto label and auto tag my images with all this stuff that it needs, all the rich, because usually when you ship a production image, it gets a lot of different tags. You might put latest on it, you might put a PR number on it, or a CI build number on it. You might have a SymVer on it or a date-based build number on it. You might have all of them. You might have the branch name in one. Like you just might have all these different tags, right? And instead of having to build all that into your own scripting and automation, the metadata action does all that for you, and it's incredibly advanced. And I've just not seen any other solution that allows me with just a few lines of YAML to do all this level of automation, like the images and the flavors and the tag inputs. I mean, it's crazy the amount of sophistication in this. And for example, I'm able to say with one line of YAML, don't tag this image with this specific tag unless the PR has been merged, and then use this tag to push it up to Docker Hub, but don't push it to GitHub. If it's for a PR and it hasn't yet been merged, only push it to GitHub, not to Docker Hub, right? This is all like simple little things that I basically add into YAML. This is not complex scripting, but that's the level of sophistication that you often need in a production setting. So I really appreciate this action. It's free, it's open source, it works on any repo in GitHub. And I use it on every one of my projects. So if you go over to if you're interested in this, by the way, I have a lot of stuff on this. By the way, if you're in my Docker Mastery course, we just added 2 new sections with a whole bunch of videos about GitHub Actions. And if you go over here to my GitHub, you will find a list. And if you just search for action, you will see all these different repos that give you templates, documentation, examples of using GitHub Actions for building your images, testing your images, and you can look in my own repos because I use this stuff myself. So if you were, for example, to go into, let's see, I'm going to go into an example voting app, and then inside of my .github directory, there is now a workflows directory, and in there, this is every one of my workflows of automation. And if I want to look at the result app, this is all the YAML that I need to build, test, and push my images to Docker Hub and to GitHub Container Registry. So if you look at this right here, these are my tag rules. And some of them are saying, hey, automatically tag with the branch name. Automatically tag if it's a PR. It's got a pull request, give it the PR number as a tag. So I can refer to that if I ever need to download that image for testing. If I use SymVer, and there's a requirements on how you use SymVer, but if I use SymVer, automatically increment the version number based on my SymVer rules. If I'm using GitHub Actions like this is, then automatically add the GitHub run ID to a different tag for each image I push. And so I can do all this advanced stuff. If I do these 2 lines right there, this basically means I want to push to 2 registries at the same time. I want to push to Docker Hub and to GitHub Container Registry. In case one goes down, I have a backup. So there's all this cool stuff you can do in there, and this is all a part of Docker's official GitHub Actions. You can do a lot of this sometimes in other CI solutions, but I haven't seen one this sophisticated without me having to write scripts or my own language automation to do it. So. I'm just catching up on the chat, sorry. Oh, this is a good insight, Brendan. Thank you. You've been using GitLab since August, so you already have more experience than me. I've worked with a few teams on it, but I don't host any of my own repos on GitLab yet, so I don't have like the experience with my own projects. I just sort of see other teams using it, and I see what they've done with it, but I don't get too heavily involved. So it's good to have someone who's been using it daily. It's slower, it's self-hosted, not as intuitive, nor as easy to find help because there's not as many users. That's one of the things about GitHub is it's the networking power of the ecosystem. Like everyone wants to be on GitHub. And the reality that I have is that, you know, if I work with enterprise security teams and they'll just buy GitHub Enterprise. I've seen some of those teams try to use Drone, and Drone is a open source automation solution, but it's not near as sophisticated as GitHub Actions. And GitHub Actions, even when you use the cloud-based version of GitHub Actions, you can run your own runners inside your data center, and you don't have to open any incoming ports because the way that it works, like most runners, but most automation runners, they reach out from inside. So you only need to have the ports going out. I'm not sure what the exact ports are, but I'm just assuming it's HTTPS 443. It reaches out to GitHub and then pulls down any jobs it needs to run. And then, of course, it has to be able to access images to pull down images and other code that it runs. But I see teams that are trying to create a secure infrastructure that don't necessarily have the need to run GitHub Enterprise internally, but they do need to run a lot of their automation on their own private infrastructure, and they still use GitHub Actions with private runners. And they build their own runners in their own data centers or in their own cloud. Maybe they want to run them in the cloud. And they just connect it up to GitHub Actions and they run their stuff there. So a lot of these all have very similar features like that. All of them allow you to run your code on prem or whatever. Yeah. So I love that my assumptions around GitLab being a great alternative, but not as great or as feature rich as the billions of dollars that Microsoft and GitHub have to develop this tool. And I really think that they're leaning into GitHub Actions. If you didn't know, there is a change on Twitter. If you're a Twitter user, there is a Twitter handle for GitHub changelog. And I follow this, and in fact, you can see I actually have it on my announcements. The reason being is that a lot of us, we live inside our Git repos, whether that's GitHub or GitLab or wherever you're storing your Git, right? And of course, we all spend time on automation platforms. So the way that I keep up to date on all the changes happening to GitHub Actions is I follow this changelog, which is everything GitHub, and I set it to notify me, and then I just see the notifications pop up, and if there's nothing in there I'm interested about, I ignore them. But every day, I mean, if you just look back, let's see, December 20th, 19th, 19th, 16th, 16th. So it usually links to a GitHub blog post announcing a new feature or a new expansion of a feature. And so what I do, because the pace of change is so rapid, I don't read all the blog. I use this as sort of a blog notification, and I only read the ones that I care about because I don't use all the features of GitHub. And there's probably a better way for me to do this and filter on GitHub Actions so that I only see announcements for GitHub Actions, but those are all in here. So that's a pro tip in case you're trying to stay up to date with all the new stuff, because GitHub Actions is pretty new. It's only like 4 years old, and they have had a rapid pace of features, including some of my favorite features of the last year, like the ability for me to now use reusable stuff. So in my examples, you'll notice, check this out. This is a workflow that calls the real workflow, which lives in a separate repository that I centralize, and I create a generic workflow. So this is kind of like a Terraform module approach. and I create a workflow that builds a standard image with a standard set of inputs that itself uses all those GitHub actions from Docker. But instead of me having to put all of that, 50 lines of YAML in every workflow, I just put it in one place. And then over here, I call it, I give it permissions, I add the secrets I need, like my GitHub login. And then I say, I've created this structure of, I only put in the things I need. I only need to tell it which registries to deploy to, which registries to push to, what the image names I need for it to have, what are the tags I need for it to have, which context in my repo, because this is a mono repo build, so I only want it to build on Docker with a context of a certain directory. If I have a different file name, I can tell it a Docker file name that's different. If I want to target a build stage, I tell it that. I then tell it which platforms I want QEMU to build on, and I choose my favorite three, right? The 32-bit ARM, 64-bit ARM, and Intel. And then on this one, I don't do comments, but I have a feature in it where it will add all my labels and my tags into the PR so that you can see what the PR is building. And that all comes from a different repo. So I can just highlight that, go over to GitHub, and go to that repo. And inside that repo, under its GitHub directory, workflows, you can see that I've created a convention of if it's a reusable, if it's meant to be used by other workflows, I call it reusable. If I'm using a workflow to call other ones, I call it a calling. So that's how I name them. And so the reusable one is 202 lines. It's half of its comments, because I love to comment. Comment your stuff, comment your code. So I add all these inputs. These are all the different inputs you can add into my workflow. This is all open source. You can totally steal my stuff. And so you just go down here, and then I accept the secrets, and then this is the real job. It has one job, and it builds and pushes the image. And I can do things like I pick the versions of these steps, and this is where I control versions. So I don't have to update the versions of every different step in all my repos. I have dozens of repos that all use this same workflow, and I just have to change it in one place. So you can see I have the versions of all my different steps. This is where I actually log into Docker Hub, and then I log into GitHub Container Registry. I set the metadata. That's the one that I'm a huge fan of. Then I build and push all in one step. Then I add comments to PRs, and this is smart enough to know, is it a build on a PR? And if so, is there already a comment? Because if there's a comment, it's going to update those comments rather than create new ones. And then down at the very bottom, I actually just spit out the image tag at the end of the run. Anyway, so that's all there for you to use. Those are all unlicensed, which means that the license is using the unlicensed, which is, to me, basically public domain. It's saying, I'm not even MIT licensing this. You can do whatever you want with it. You can sell it if you'd like. This is all there, all right? And if you look in the repo of any of these repos, I'll just send you this one as an example. It links to all the other examples. So if you just scroll down, you can see that there's other repositories with a bunch of other examples, and you can find the others while you're in one of them, essentially. All right. So get EA. How do you say it? I don't know how you say it. GitEA is now introducing GitEA actions. Or Gita. Maybe was it Gita? Yeah, and so, yeah, if it can use GitHub Actions and just basically, because the GitHub Actions, technically the runner's open source, I think that runner's open source, the actions themselves are open source. So I could see how another platform could just build on that and just rely on that marketplace. And that's pretty powerful. That's pretty cool. So I'm just reading Zolt's comments there. Thank you. You may be akin to the conclusion that you're maybe not using GitLab correctly. Well, one, that's awesome, because going to KubeCon and talking to vendors, that's exactly why we want to talk to them there, and that's while we were all there. I spent most of my time in the vendor booths talking to vendors. I didn't actually get to attend a lot of sessions because I was either hanging out with friends like you or at vendor booths, chatting it up, talking about their products. For one thing, apparently it's not intended to have over 40,000 tags in a repo. Yeah, cleanup of tags is a problem. And oh, get T, like in the leaf. Okay, get T. I like it. Thank you. Thanks, Dan. Yeah, we talked about Tecton earlier. I don't really have any experience on it in a real world scenario, so I don't really have a comparison. My general comparison usually results in it's not as good as GitHub Actions. So if we're talking about automation and automation platforms, there's tons of options out there. You know, I know some people that love Azure DevOps. I know some people that are sticking with Circle CI because they've been using it forever. I know people that are on GitLab, so they're going to choose to use GitLab's DevOps automation. So, you know, it's a question of what does your team know? What I do recommend, and I think is universal, is if you're starting out or if you don't yet have automation platforms, don't do Jenkins. Try not to run your own if you don't have to. Again, to me, GitHub or Git storage, image storage, software code repository storage, workflows around all that, so automations around all that stuff. I don't try to self-host unless I have a mandatory company requirement to host those, because I look at that stuff as utility. It's like cloud infrastructure, just like it is image repositories, code repositories, artifact storage. You know, those things are plumbing. Logging and monitoring solutions, they're plumbing. They're not really the reason I do my job. They are the tools that I need to do my real job, which is usually creating automation, maintaining systems, you know. So I don't want to have to run those things if I don't need to. And so even if I've got my own data center, I'm going to always prefer to use as much SaaS as possible. And I just don't have enough people to do all that stuff. I don't, you know, Harbor is great. It's a really cool image storage solution, has lots of features, but if I don't have to run Harbor, why do I want to? Like if I'm not mandated from the security office or the legal office or somebody else telling me to run it, I just generally don't want to. Companies hire me because they don't have enough DevOps people. It's hard to find them. It's hard to get good ones. They're expensive, and people don't want to have to hire too many of them. So we end up with too much work. And so I'm usually trying to find ways to outsource the work to a SaaS platform. So that's my worldview. It doesn't mean that you're wrong in doing what you're doing. It's just that's my worldview. So that leads me to not want to use self-hosted solutions like that, because I don't want to have to maintain it, monitor it, back it up, test the restores, make sure that, you know, there's someone on call in case it goes down. I just don't want to have to do that. So, but Git T, I'm going to check it out. I'm excited about this. I did not know this existed. Git T. Thank you so much for that. Well, Jenkins X is an interesting tool, but really it's just for Kubernetes as far as I know. So I knew some people that were working there that were involved with the project a little bit that were not fans of it. I don't know anyone that uses Jenkins X, so I don't recommend it. And it's not because I've tried it a lot and don't like it. It's just I don't see a big ecosystem around it, and it, to me, it was created simply as a competitive nature to other tools that already existed, but Jenkins, CloudBees, the company, didn't own them. So I don't always know that that makes for a good product, just because you need to have your own product. You know, the that's NIMBY, not invented here syndrome. That's kind of the, you know, my take on Jenkins X is just because they didn't have their own GitOps based solution, they made their own, but there's equally good ones already out there. So anyway, I maybe have a wrong, outdated impression of it. So if you have used Jenkins X, let me know. Help me inform my own opinion. But I did have them on the show a few years ago. It was pretty early days, and it was pretty simple, didn't have a lot of features, and essentially allowed you to automatically load your workloads on Kubernetes like Argo and Flux do. So I would love to talk more with actual users of Jenkins X and why they're using it. You know, what's better about it, what do they like about it that's different than the other ones, but I don't know anyone that uses it, so. Yes, Stephen, this is a good conversation. A lot of this stuff really depends on the job you're going to have, right? Like if your company culture is one of self-running everything and self-hosting everything as much as possible, that's often a culture thing more than it is sometimes a technical requirement, right? So if your team frowns on yet another platform to pay, and I've seen this, right? Then they will try to figure out ways to run their own stuff because they think it's free. It's open source, so it's free, but it's not really free, right? It's never free. You have to run it on your own infrastructure. You got to pay for that infrastructure. You got to pay for someone to maintain it. And that is a different job, right? So there are teams that will not want you if you don't know how to run a lot of this stuff yourself. But there are also teams that if you don't know how to do all this in the cloud with the cloud services, then they don't want you either. So I think it very much depends on the job and the company culture that you're working in. People often ask me, which cloud certification should I get to get into DevOps? Basically my attitude is, if you want to learn Azure and then go after jobs that use Azure. But if you've learned AWS, you may not be able to get jobs with a company as easy if there's some company that uses Azure. So you're going to need to start targeting your jobs. You can't just blast your resume out to everyone and then hope and pray. You probably need to target the companies that use the tools that you know. If you're someone who really knows GitLab really well, then go look for company jobs that are using GitLab because you will be more valuable to them. If the company doesn't use GitLab, they don't care how smart you are in GitLab. So it just depends. And it's tough because there's too many tools for us to all know. It is a hard thing. So hopefully, this is my take on jobs and teams and culture, is you do the best you can. You learn the number one tool in that space, right? Tecton is not the number one CI tool, so I wouldn't learn it first. Linode isn't the number one cloud, so I wouldn't go learn them first. So if you're new, learn the number one tool, the most popular tool, right? And then that makes you more diverse for the job. But once you get a job, you're going to be focusing on the tools that company has. And along the way, you'll get experience in other varying tools that are different than the ones you use. But it doesn't mean that you need to know all the CI tools. I work with companies every day that hire me not because I know their CI tool. What they tend to value is how quickly you can learn, how do you prove what you know, and how quickly can you learn the things that we use. So the way you prove that is you show them through your own blogging, your own open source, maybe you make videos on YouTube. You prove to them what you know through sharing everything you know. And to me, one of the most important assets of a DevOps engineer is sharing what you know. It's one of the core tenets of DevOps, is to share knowledge and collaborate, because none of us can know everything. So if you're not sharing on the internet, then how does a company know that you're going to really share a lot when you get to be their employee? Now, I understand in some environments, you're maybe working in secure environments, they don't allow you to post things. You probably can't have a social presence. I know this, for example, if you work at Apple. In certain places in Apple, you can't have a big social presence. You can't be doing all these things without permission. So that depends, if you work in a government or a high secure facility, that's going to be way different for you. But for most of us, sharing your knowledge on the internet is how you prove your knowledge to potential employers. You've probably heard that your GitHub profile is part of your resume. If you think that a hiring manager is not Googling you before the interview, think again, because they're going to Google you. I want to know what you've done. So I'm going to Google your name before, I see you in an interview, because I want to know, are you doing things on the internet? Are you sharing what you learn on the internet? Because I might find out that you have some really good content and you're really smart at something, and I might learn from you. And I'm more interested in that than if I can't find you. If I can't find you on the internet, you might be able to work at the CIA, but I won't probably hire you in any teams that I work with, because I'm going to depend on you sharing your knowledge and proving what you know before I'm going to have an interview with you. So that's a great conversation there, Stefan. Yeah, build versus buy is, I mean, ideally, I'd love to have a whole team of DevOps engineers that are building a platform on open source tooling for our developers. We've talked, the conversation over this last couple of years has been more and more about building internal platforms for developers, but you need people to do that. You need a dedicated team of engineers, actual software engineers, to cobble all these pieces of open source together. And if you don't have that, then you've got to depend on SaaS. A lot of the teams that hire me I'm a freelance consultant, so people don't hire me because they've got everything figured out. They hire me because they don't have enough people. So I tend to work with teams. My worldview is of teams that don't have enough expertise in DevOps, in containers, in cloud native. So your worldview might be a little different because you maybe work in those communities where they have enough people. We've had a lot of layoffs this year as the recession has hit. So there's probably a few more DevOps engineers out there than normal, but DevOps are still in such high demand that I don't think it's really affected the amount of people we have to work to find, because it's hard to find good people. Argo CD or Flux? We talked about this earlier in the show. Rewind in the show. We talked about Argo and Flux for like 10 minutes. I tend to use Argo. Lots of people use Flux. I've used Flux before. I tend to default to Argo, mostly I think because I like the GUI, and Flux, to my knowledge, doesn't have as advanced of a GUI the last time I checked. So I tend to like to deliver the Argo dashboard to developers so that they can watch all of that stuff happen in the background. And I know at this point, I know Argo better than Flux, so I just tend to prefer it because I know it better. But I know plenty of people that use Flux. And as mentioned earlier, Flux is, I think, more common in large automated systems like cloud hosters, other big enterprise systems where they need it very lean and small and they don't need a GUI and they don't need all that other stuff. So, do I have any idea about Dagger or Cloak? Do you think that will be a de facto for CI/CD like Docker? Brock, you were here a while ago. Go back. We just talked about Dagger like 20 minutes ago, 30 minutes ago. I talked about Dagger. I don't think it will be a standard. I think, unfortunately, the complexity of running multiple platforms for your CI, one on top of the other, is a complex topic that will require advanced users to do it. A person new to automation is going to have a hard time adopting Dagger because Dagger requires something else to run it. So you're going to have to adopt Circle CI or GitLab or GitHub Actions or whatever. So you have to have two things. It's kind of like when we all, trying to think of an analogy here. The thing that really worked for Docker was that you could bring everything, your monoliths, your old apps, your microservices, whatever you had, it all worked in Docker. And Docker tended to replace shell scripting and other automation. So it wasn't a net add of complexity. It was actually replacing something that you had before. The way that I perceive Dagger is that it's a net add. It's a new additional tool that does not replace all of an existing tool. It complements, enhances, and gives you new features, gives you new capabilities, but doesn't completely replace the need for other CI automations. I'm hoping to have them on the show and to have this discussion because I would love to see more use of it. I think it's a great idea, but I do think you need to be advanced. You have to understand your own problems and why you need a tool like Dagger. Because for me, I do everything in GitHub Actions. When I'm using GitHub Actions locally, I use ACT, A-C-T. So I don't really need Dagger for my own stuff because I use everything through GitHub Actions, ACT, and Docker Compose. So I already have that tool set. I don't have the problem that Dagger is trying to solve. I am very interested in it from an idea of how many other people use it, but I don't know anybody using it right yet. I mean, it's very young, it's very early. I hope and wish them the best, but I think what they're going to need is their own hosted platform and their own way to help you avoid having to write anything else for any other CI tool. Maybe it's just an API plugin or something where you never have to care about that CI tool and you can only have to care about Dagger. And maybe they're working on this. Maybe I'm out of date, so I'm going to have them on the show if they say yes. I know Marcos works there, one of the Docker captains. We'll hopefully have them on the show next year. Have I tried to write Terraform, Ansible, Docker with ChatGPT? No, I don't need to do that because I have Copilot in VS Code from GitHub, and it's been doing that for 2 years now, or well, a year and a half. We've had Copilot for a year and a half. I've already been doing that. So I don't need ChatGPT because I have a code-specific tool that, yeah, it is not free. I mean, ChatGPT's biggest feature is that it's free. But no, I don't. I already use Copilot, and I think it's fine. I don't see myself using a generative AI like ChatGPT for making code or YAML. The problem I have with it is that it's very confident in its incorrect statements. And for example, someone sent me ChatGPT. Someone, let me see if I can pull this up. Someone sent me, they asked GPT who I was. And it said, who is Bret Fisher Docker or whatever. Half of what it said was wrong. It was very confident in describing me. It's like they make Udemy courses. They're an author with multiple books. I've never written a book. I'm not an author. So I don't know where it got that information. But it says it in there like it's fact. Like he did this. No, I did not. It says I'm an advanced, I think it also said I'm an advanced developer that knows many languages. I don't. That is not true. I do not know many languages. I do not consider myself a polyglot developer. I really just consider myself an amateur developer. I've never said that I'm and in fact, really, I don't ever say I'm a developer because it's a little misleading to suggest that I write code all day. I don't. So anyway, ChatGPT got half of me wrong. Granted, I'm maybe not the best use case, but someone just showed up and showed it to me. The problem was you couldn't tell fact from fiction. It was all in there. So I have a lot of problems with the current generation of that. But Copilot's great, and Copilot gives me multiple. It gives me multiple ideas. It will suggest different things to me, and I can pick which one I think is the better iteration or the better idea. We had a show on Copilot a year and a half ago when it first released in beta, and even back then it was still pretty good. It was wrong about half the time, and it's only gotten better. So if you're interested in ChatGPT for development and DevOps, go look at Copilot. It now works in NeoVim and I think JetBrains or something else, as well as VS Code. So go check that out. By the way, if you do significant open source, you can get it for free. You can get Copilot for free, but you have to you have to do a bunch of stuff on GitHub in open source in order to do that. So that's a great conversation. I meant to have a ChatGPT show. We just never got to it this year, and I need to bring someone on the show who spent a lot of time with it. We talked about it, and as well as stable diffusion and other generative AIs. We talked about that 2 weeks ago on the Best of DevOps 2022. So if you're interested in some more of that, we talked about it 2 weeks ago. Oh yeah, Stack Overflow. I mean, I know some people that are really, really into Stack Overflow, and you include that in your resume and tell your and put in your resume so that the people reading it will say, oh, let me go check them out online, and make sure you're linking to that. You know, put a README in your GitHub repo, in your GitHub profile, put it in there. You know, this is me on Stack Overflow, or you know, whatever other. There's a DevOps Stack Overflow. There's lots of Stack exchanges other than Stack Overflow. So if you hang out there, go put your stuff there. If you hang out in other places like the Docker forums, put that stuff on there so that potential employers can go look you up on those platforms. That's a great idea. Thank you so much, Stefan. Or was that Stefan? No, that was Zolt. Sorry. Thank you, Zolt. You're asking about example projects and recommendations on projects to improve skills and show on resume. Well, the famous one for Kubernetes is Doing Kubernetes the Hard Way from Kelsey Hightower. So if you go look up Kubernetes the Hard Way, you'll find his repository, and you actually fork it into your own, and then you can walk through it. And so that's one thing, is put that in there and sort of show off how you build your own Kubernetes from scratch, and create, mostly it's just creating certificates and installing binaries, but you get a sense for the idea of how Kubernetes comes together, how the pieces of that puzzle fit. That's one. The next one is simply just search GitHub for example distributed applications or example microservices. There's Pet Shop, Soap Shop, there's a bunch out there. People can probably tell you in chat, what demo apps do you all recommend? And what I would do is I would clone those or fork those into your own repository, then Dockerize them, then Kubernetes them, if that's a verb. Dockerize, put them on Kubernetes, add Terraform, add GitHub Actions, like do all those things, and then do what I do, right? Like go in your GitHub profile and make a README, right? Make a README there so that you can display links to all the things you're doing. And this is, to me, this is part of my resume. If somebody wants to hire me, they're probably going to see this page first, right after they look at my resume. And my resume is going to point to this and say, for more information on the things I create, go here, go to my website, my blog. But this is one of the big places, right? And so they can see, instead of looking through my repos and trying to figure out what they are, I explain all of them here, right? You can also do something like Resume Builder. So there is a tool. I haven't touched this in years, so my resume is really out of date. But there is a resume project. There are lots of little projects like these where you can write your resume in JSON, and this one is particularly in JSON, and then you can host it on GitHub and have an actual virtual resume. So for example, mine is just resume, bretfisher.com. Years out of date. At least I think it works. Maybe it doesn't work today. But yeah, this is a, oh, it's because it's not HTTPS, that's why. So yeah, so a little bit outdated, but I just use a template from them, and I list all my stuff, all the things I do, all the places I'm at, and yeah, there you go. Check that out, and I encourage you to use it, because the more public stuff you do, the more they can find out about you, and you can, basically you want to direct a potential employer to the places you want them to see, not the places you don't want them to see, right? Maybe you don't want them to go hunting you down on Twitter or Instagram or something. So make sure that you're linking to your LinkedIn and to your GitHub and to your blog or to your YouTube channel, or wherever you put your stuff that you do on tech. Put that up there so that they can find that right away and they can focus on the good stuff, because you always want to impress them with the good stuff first. So yeah, ChatGPT, and that's the thing, Stan. I think like ChatGPT is popular right now because it's free, but as soon as it's not free, I don't think a lot of people will be using it. And we're seeing it show up in other tools. Like I have Notion. Notion is adding ChatGPT-like features already in a beta to Notion. We have things, we already have Copilot in VS Code and other code editors. We have, what's that one called? I'm already forgetting what that one's called. Jasper, right? There's the Jasper tool that does a lot of this stuff. It's a paid product that creates that. It's similar to ChatGPT, but it's more advanced, has more features, functionality. But I think that we're not, OpenAI is not how most people will be using this AI. I think we're all going to be using it in our tools that we're already in. Like we're going to have probably a plug-in to your blog, or if you're using a blog hoster like Medium. Can you imagine if Medium put Jasper or OpenAI or ChatGPT into Medium? Like, I think that's how most people are going to end up using these tools, is in the tools they already use will show it up as a feature. I just recently used in Pixelmator Pro, which is kind of like Adobe Photoshop for Mac. Pixelmator is my image management of choice, and it has the machine learning enhance this image, and it works really well. I can give it a really crappy image and it makes it sharp and gives it a higher pixel rate, higher pixel count basically, and it works like a champ. But I use it through the tool I'm already using. I don't go and find a separate tool that then uses AI or machine learning to create a better image. It's just the tool I'm already using that adds that as a free feature. And I think that's how this is all going to shape up, because as fast as this stuff is happening, I think all the platforms are just going to license OpenAI and license a lot of these other tools, or if they're open source, like Stable Diffusion is open source, they're going to use these tools in the background, and we're just going to, it's all going to happen very quickly, I think. Imagine if like iMessage adds ChatGPT and I can just text people without actually having to type it or say it, and then our texts are just going to chat each other up, and we don't even have to be there. Yeah, Brendan. ChatGPT is limited on current events. That is one of the big limitations on it, because I wanted it to give me a summary of KubeCon, and it's like, I don't know anything about current events, so I can't help you. Yeah. Service mesh. I don't really have a preference, because I've worked with teams. I've worked with teams on service mesh, Julio, that have used all of them. I'm gonna be looking more into traffic's service mesh. They were the first ones to kind of come out with this idea of one proxy per node instead of one sidecar per pod. I did not like the sidecar model, and I see that the trend is now starting to be where they're all moving to a better, a less resource intensive model of one proxy per node, which I really appreciate. I like that approach way better. And so I'm going to spend some time in the next quarter working on traffic and some traffic content I'm going to be creating. Stay tuned for that. That's coming. Some free content, hopefully, but we'll see what happens. Nothing's set in stone yet, but that's going to probably happen. And so I think that the service meshes, as they get simpler, it'll be easier for me to determine which one you should be using, because they all feel very burdensome and complex. And it's really, I think, again, we talked about this earlier. So if you're more interested in service mesh, I had a whole 10-minute conversation earlier in the show, but I don't really have a preference right now, because I've used each one of them a little bit with separate projects with different teams. I've never really used one only for like a year. So I don't really have that type of long-term experience to say this one is definitely the easiest, the least amount of resources, the biggest community with the most documentation. It's one proxy per node, not one per sidecar, all the things that I would want to care about when it comes to service mesh. Corey Quinn has a Kubernetes the hard way. Ooh, I didn't know about that. I need to have Corey Quinn on the show. I have not. We had a brief Twitter exchange about it, but we've not come up with a topic. Ron, I don't blur out my telephone number because all the spammers already have it, so why not you have it too? If you want to send me a text, send me a text. I just put my phone number on the internet because just like my email address, I have spam filters and all the things that protect me. So I'm not particularly worried about it. I never answer the phone anyway. It all goes to voicemail. So I put my resume out there. I am a freelance consultant, so my contact details. If I make it hard for you to get a hold of me, it probably am not going to be a very good freelance consultant. So I am not scared of putting my personal details out there. So hopefully you will do nice things with it, not bad things. But thanks, Ron. I appreciate you looking out for me, and I'm glad that you like that. But yeah, my phone number and email address are readily available on the internet. So, all right, we have been chatting for 2 hours now. Get your last questions in. I'm going to wrap this up for the day. My voice is getting a little sore, so I'm going to have another drink of coffee, and let's see what good questions we can have, and then I'll wrap it up for the day. By the way, next week, I'm hopefully going to have a premiere next week, which is a YouTube premiere is basically a video that we all watch at the same time. So it's kind of like a live, but it's not a live. So I'm not going to live stream next week, but it will be some new content. I'm going to hopefully record that today and put that out there. Ooh, that's a great question there, Komajaru. So the question is, any special guests on the 200th episode? I haven't thought about that. We are getting close, aren't we? I have to actually look at my list. It's probably not going to be a special show, but it should be. Maybe let me look at the calendar. I'll have to look at the calendar. That's a great idea. I didn't think about it, and then we talked about it at like show episode 175 or something. We said we should do something special for 20 or 200, but then it's crept up on us and we haven't thought about it. So I'll let you know. If you're on my Patreon or in the Discord server, you will definitely get a notification about all future shows. Yeah. So you'll know about that. But that's a great question. I don't know who's going to be on there. Yeah, good insight, Stan. I like that. More info on the ChatGPT stuff. Yeah, I mean, I too have been listening to a lot of the podcasts, people discussing it, listening to all the opinions about, and we've had this, the Dolly and stable diffusion. I don't know why I can't say that today. All this other stuff, and it's kind of like, whether it's good or bad inherently, all us humans, we're going to be driving this stuff until it's taken over everything. So it's. We can't stop. We don't know how to stop. It's sort of, if it's useful, if the community finds it useful, then we'll all be using it. I think we're going to be more specialized. I think general AIs are going to take a lot longer to get better. I think like Elon and other people talk about this, general AIs versus specific AIs. And a Copilot to me is a very good example of a very targeted, specific AI that does solve real world problems, which is why people now pay for it. And GitHub can make money on it. I am looking at Jasper, actually considering doing more paying for Jasper, looking at their new image service as well as some of their Jasper stuff. But I'm already seeing these other AIs show up. AI for my Notion. I don't know if anyone knows about Notion, but my favorite note taker. It's where I keep everything for the last, 5 years or something, 4 or 5 years. Notion is my jam. And they're going to be adding it here soon as a regular feature. It's still currently in beta, and I'm in the beta waiting list. But I do not plan anytime in the near future to start blogging with an AI blog written. I find that any of the tools that try to write for you are, I like meat in my posts. I like to give you true value and to answer very specific questions and to give you specific examples and to be helpful. If I can't change your behavior or give you really good new insight, then I don't want to write the blog article. So I find that a lot of the current ones, they're so general in their generative text writing that it's not really that informative. It's interesting and it makes coherent paragraphs, but did I really learn something that's going to change the way I work? No. So like if you went to my website now and you looked at my top 3 articles, they're very long, they're very detailed, they're very wordy, because I want you to come away with very specific knowledge points. Everything I've written in every AI that I've tried doesn't do that. It's interesting, but it's not really helpful. So we're going to get there with it, I think, but I don't have any plans of like using it to speed up the ability for me to write things. All right, everyone, we're going to wrap this up. Thank you all so much for being here. Thanks, Martin, for the happy holidays. Thank you, Zolt, for being here as always. Brendan, thank you all to my members and supporters for this year. You have been great. Again, we're making this community over on Discord. So up there, the Discord server, that's where all the action happens between the live shows. Remember, the podcasts come out on Fridays. We got another podcast coming out tomorrow. You can get that. Well, the podcast links are below, or you can just go to bretfisher.com and get to the podcast. Our best of shows are coming out last week and this week for the year. So stay tuned for those on the podcast. Discord for everything else. And I will see you not next week, because next week we're going to be putting up a video, but it's not going to be live. I'll be back in 2 weeks on YouTube Live. See you next year. Happy holidays and Happy New Year.